The anime kicks off with a sweeping shot of the city, right before some gnarly disease hits everyone, sparking total chaos and destruction. Then, a mysterious pink-haired girl and her crew just stroll through the disaster like it's a walk in the park. The scene flips to a bunch of kids wandering the city, watching people drop like flies. A voiceover announces that a lethal virus has wiped out humanity, and that's when we see Michaela. One of the kids tells another, a dude named Yuichiro, to protect the little ones since their director kicked the bucket. The voice reveals the virus doesn't touch kids under 13, and that the third progenitor, some queen named Cruel Tepes, is taking charge of all the kids in the district. Next thing you know, some shady figures ambush the kids in a room and haul them off in trucks. Fast forward 4 years, and we're in a castle owned by Cruel Tepes, where the kids are being processed. We see Michaela and Yushiro, who are now older and probably moodier. Then we watch as vampires drain blood from all the kids, leaving them super weak. Afterwards, they're given food, but Yushiro, our resident emo boy, refuses to eat it, all salty about the whole situation. Michaela warns him he'll get sick if he keeps it up, telling him the place isn't so bad since they're safe and with their family. But Yuichiro isn't buying it. He's not about to be treated like livestock. Later, we see 2 guards step on some little kids, which totally ticks off Yuichiro, and he decides to play hero and demand an apology. He almost gets himself turned into a kebab until Lord Farid steps in. Farid, who's weirdly chummy with Michaela, asks what's up. Michaela explains that one of his family members, this clown Yuichiro, is causing trouble, but still accepts Farid's invitation to his mansion. Farid asks if Yuichiro is coming too, which sets the ugly boy off, and he tries to mouth off at him, but Michaela shuts him down. Naturally, Yuichiro gets mad at Michaela, but Mika explains it's literally impossible for a human to throw hands with a vampire and win. After that, Yuichiro asks Michaela if he knows the noble Lord Farid. Michaela's like, yeah, duh, and mentions he gets a lot of perks in exchange for his blood, including some seriously gourmet food. Michaela tells Yuichiro he needs to start using his brain to survive this place, but Yuichiro, being the hothead he is, just walks up, punches him, and storms off without a word. Next, we see Yuichiro just chilling on his bed until Akane comes over to check on him. She reminds him that all the orphanage kids are his family, even though he denies it every single time. This triggers a flashback for our boy to his first day at the orphanage, when Michaela offered him a hand in friendship. When he gets back home for dinner, his little siblings are all excited to see him, telling him they're having curry. Yuichiro is shocked to see Akane cooking and asks how that's even possible. Akane says it's all thanks to Michaela, which just makes Yuichiro even angrier about what he's been doing. During the meal, the kid refuses to touch the curry, while his siblings argue about whose birthday it is. Akane settles it by declaring it's everyone's birthday. Then the kids ask Yuichiro where Michaela is, but he's got no clue what to say. Later, Michaela shows up late at night when everyone's asleep except Yuichiro, who was waiting for him. Yuichiro tells him next time he'll be the one to trade his blood for food, but Michaela just jokes about how his blood probably tastes gross and tells him not to worry. Then he tells Yuichiro to get ready to fight the vampires. Yuichiro tells Michaela to stop carrying the whole world on his shoulders, but Michaela just brushes it off as nonsense, saying he clings to Yuichiro's words for inspiration, just like the other kids do. After their heart-to-heart, they go eat curry, and Michaela gives Yuichiro a gun to fight vampires. He also shows him a map of the city he swiped from Farid's mansion. The plan? Escape tonight with the whole family, because they've got it all figured out. Yuichiro worries about the virus, but Michaela assures him they'll be fine since everyone in the family is only 12. Michaela then tells Akane to wake everyone up so they can start their super stealthy escape. Following Michaela's lead, they sneak through the city. In the sewers, the kids ask where they're going, and he tells them they're going back to their world where they can eat curry every day. Just then, they're almost caught by a guard, but manage to hide in time. As they near the end of their escape route, Farid pops up saying he's been waiting for them, totally savoring the despair on the kids' faces. He reveals he was just playing with them the whole time. Then he grabs one of the little girls and drains her dry, killing her. Yuichiro freaks out and shoots at Farid, but the vamp dodges it with his insane speed. Farid then reveals the map is real, and they're super close to the exit. Yuichiro tries to create an opening for the kids to escape, but fails miserably, letting Farid murder every single one of them, while Michaela screams for him to stop. Even Akane dies. This pushes Michaela to grab the gun and charge Farid, who thanks him for his divine blood before brutally killing him. But the sacrifice wasn't for nothing. Yuichiro uses the distraction to shoot Farid right in the head. Michaela, on the brink of death, tells Yuichiro to run, but he refuses to leave him, crying his eyes out over losing his entire family. Yuichiro finally listens after Michaela begs him to run as the guards close in. He manages to escape into a bleak, new world where some adults are talking about a prophecy being fulfilled. Apparently, it foretold the appearance of a test subject from the Hyakuya labs, the same labs that wrecked Japan. Some guy says he'll use Yuichiro to wipe out all the vampires. But Yuichiro just hugs him, sobbing, and promises to do it. We jump forward another 4 years, and our protagonist, Yuichiro, is now an adult. We see this loser still haunted by what happened to Mika all those years ago. Suddenly, a horseman of the apocalypse attacks. Yuichiro's teammates try to talk to the beast, wondering why a rookie is even there and telling him to fall back. But our boy refuses, driven only by his thirst for revenge against the vamps. Ignoring his superior's orders, he charges the beast and, not gonna lie, defeats it pretty easily, slicing it clean in half with his sword. In the next scene, this clown is at school, complaining about being punished even though he saved the day. The teacher calls him out for muttering and disrupting the class, threatening to suspend him if he keeps up the attitude. Yuichiro isn't fazed at all. In fact, he's thrilled by the teacher's words, which shocks everyone in the room. Just then, a girl taps his shoulder. Our hero turns to ask who she is. The girl, writing in a notebook, introduces herself as Shinoa Haragi, an army envoy sent to supervise him. She makes it clear that if he doesn't cooperate by attending class, she'll have to report him, which will just extend his suspension. The protagonist gets ticked off, which in turn annoys the teacher for being ignored. Shinoa stresses the importance of cooperation, and he finally caves and follows the teacher's orders. Shinoa also mentions that if he can't make at least one friend, his punishment won't be lifted. This triggers a flashback for our boy, back when he thought the entire human race was extinct. But Guren and Shinoa told him that was just vampire propaganda. Sure, a chunk of humanity is gone, but when the trumpets of the apocalypse sounded, weird monsters appeared, and now the human race is making a comeback. The colonel of the Japanese Imperial Demon Army, a guy named Guren, tells him his organization will prevail and control all of humanity, promising that if Yuichiro joins them, he'll get his revenge on the vampires. In the present, the protagonist is mad at Guren because he's done jack squat for him all these years. Shinoa then teases him, seeing he has no intention of making friends, but then shows a bit of sympathy for what happened to his family, asking why he can't just get some friends or a girlfriend. Our hero gets furious and jumps to his feet, telling her to pass a message to Guren. Let him join the vampire annihilation force because he's strong enough. Shinoa replies that Guren already knew he'd say that and sent him a letter. Despite the protagonist's excitement, the letter is just Guren roasting him, telling him he needs to make at least one friend to introduce. The protagonist gets mad and storms out of the classroom, yelling that he's sick of Guren's games. Shinoa follows him, since she has to supervise him, much to his annoyance. They then see some bullies picking on a kid, but the protagonist decides to ignore it. However, he changes his mind and confronts the bullies when they treat the kid like livestock. The bullies mock him, saying he'll end up just like Yoichi, but our hero just asks if they want to fight while making fun of them. Shinoa warns him that if he hurts a civilian, his punishment will be extended, which leads to him taking a punch and getting beat up by the bullies. While running errands for the bullies, Yoichi apologizes over and over to the protagonist, who gets tired of his attitude and scolds him for letting other students push him around. Yoichi defends himself, saying that's not true, and reveals he wanted to ask Yamanaka for a favor to join their group. The protagonist asks who Yamanaka is, and Yoichi replies he's the one who punched him. He explains he needs the favor because he failed the Imperial Demon Army's entrance exam, and Yamanaka was offered a spot in the prestigious Moon Demon Company. So, he wants Yamanaka to put in a good word for him so he can retake the exam. The protagonist is shocked to hear this, since even he couldn't get in, which makes him even angrier at Guren. Yoichi says it's weird that someone like him would want to join the army, but he's doing it to avenge his sister. The protagonist sets him straight, telling him that if he had tried to save his sister, he'd be dead, so he did the right thing. He advises him against joining the army, saying that with his attitude, he has no future killing vampires, which totally distresses Yoichi. But then, a massive explosion rocks the area, and an alarm blares that a vampire has escaped from a nearby biolab. Shinoa orders the protagonist and Yoichi to take cover while she informs the Moon Demon Company. But our hero says that's not necessary. He'll take down the vampire himself. All the students try to flee, but the protagonist grabs his weapon, ready to fight, as Yamanaka watches. The battle begins, and the protagonist manages to slice off the vampire's arm, telling Yamanaka to run. However, Yamanaka admits he can't go because he lied about joining the army. He only said it to make people fear him. The vampire counterattacks with its regenerated arm, giving the protagonist a tough time. Just as the vampire is about to regain her full power, Yoichi jumps in, tackling her. The protagonist thanks him and continues the fight, but a moment of distraction allows the vampire to throw him out a window, though his sword manages to pierce her. The vampire scoffs at the small wound, but just then, Guren appears and finishes her off. Guren mocks the protagonist for trying to fight a vampire without an enchanted weapon, but thanks him for stepping in. The protagonist tells him he's seen what he can do and wants to be accepted into the company. Guren refuses, arguing that Yuichiro doesn't know how to work in a team, and calls him out for not having a single friend. At that moment, Yoichi appears and tackles the protagonist in a hug, thanking him for what he did. Even though he knocks him out, he proves he's his friend, which makes Shinoa remind Guren that he has to keep his promise. While the protagonist is unconscious, he has a vision of Mika, who tells him to give up this life of revenge and take care of his new friend. Finally, our hero wakes up in the infirmary to see his new friends happy for him. Shinoa informs him that he's now part of the Vampire Annihilation Force, as is Yoichi, thanks to his bravery. The next day, Yamanaka and his friends are in a secret room where they could get in serious trouble if the army finds them. Yamanaka and one of his buddies decide to leave, but Yuji stays behind as a mysterious door opens. Later, an embarrassed classmate gives the protagonist a thank you letter and confesses she likes him. Yuichiro is stunned, and when he tries to say something, the girl runs off. Shinoa, who was watching from a distance, comes over and teases him about being a total heartthrob now, but then roasts him for still being a virgin. Shinoa mentions this is actually a bad thing, as the army encourages romantic relationships to repopulate the human race and regain dominance in the fight against vampires. So, they need to have lots of kids. Although the protagonist seems uninterested, he asks Shinoa why he still has to attend a normal school if he's already earned a spot in the Vampire Annihilation Force. Shinoa replies that he can take his complaints to the lieutenant colonel. Yuichiro gets angry, saying Guren is never in his office, so he can't. Shinoa calms him down, telling him there's no point in yelling at her and that his training has already begun. She then shows him the demon she's made a pact with, named Shikama Doji, and her demonic weapon used against vampires, leaving Yuichiro completely amazed. After seeing it, Yuichiro says that with a weapon like that, he could defeat the vampires. Shinoa tells him that even if he had one, he couldn't win without help, which is why he needs to learn teamwork. Our boy interrupts her and challenges her to a duel for her sword so he can avenge his family. But Shinoa says he can't use a demonic weapon that has a pact with someone else. So Yuichiro tells her to show him what she's got, kicking off a very one-sided fight. Shinoa tells the protagonist it's stupid to use his normal weapon against hers, while launching special attacks from her weapon, easily defeating him. Instead of getting mad, Yuichiro is just fascinated by what he saw. Later, as they walk through the school halls, Yuichiro tells Shinoa that it must be easy to defeat vampires with that weapon. Shinoa says no, because vampires are also armed on the battlefield, which is why Guren insists on teamwork. Suddenly, Yoichi interrupts, asking for help, because he's being chased by Yamanaka and his friend. But they apologize for what they did and ask to be his subordinates. The guys tell the protagonist they want to be Yoichi's underlings because they need his help. Yamanaka apologizes and explains that Yuji went into the forbidden room, but hasn't come back. Shinoa overhears this and questions why they entered a level 1 restricted military area, saying she doesn't need excuses as it's severely punished. She thinks Yuji might have been captured by the army or even executed, so they should just forget about him. Later, the protagonist asks Shinoa what this forbidden place is all about. She replies that it's one of the 7 mysteries of the school, laughing. Yuichiro says that's just dumb, and it's obviously a restricted army thing. Getting serious, Shinoa tells the protagonist and Yoichi that it's where members of the Annihilation Force were trained, and only authorized people can enter, due to the risk of being possessed by a demon. The protagonist is shocked to hear this, as Shinoa tells him he must accompany her for the next step of his training. They head to the underground sanctuary, which are tunnels built to prevent flooding but are now used for training, just like the school itself, where they recruit people unaffected by the demon's evil aura. Shinoa finally confesses that the entire school is a large-scale human experimentation lab. They then arrive at the door where Yuji disappeared. Shinoa explains that only selected members of the Annihilation Force or those chosen by a demon pass through there. However, Yuji wasn't selected, which means his heart must have been devoured, turning him into a human-eating demon. Shinoa tells them she'll show them the power of her demonic weapon, but the protagonist rushes ahead, intending to defeat the demon to gain more power for his revenge. Yuichiro enters the forbidden room and finds many weapons belonging to the fallen in the center, and a possessed Yuji. Shinoa orders him not to interfere, as the Annihilation Force will rescue him. But our hero is interested in making a pact with the demon, Asuramaru, that Yuji has, and charges into battle. Shinoa sends Yoichi to get reinforcements. The protagonist starts his fight, but Shinoa stops him to warn that if he touches the axe with his bare hands, he'll be possessed by the demon. She also tells him his heart, filled with revenge, isn't ready to defeat it, as demons feed on negative feeling and use them against their host. This is why Gurren hasn't given him his demonic weapon. However, Yuichiro doesn't care and says he'll prove them all wrong and even defeat it without his weapon. Yuichiro begins his attack on the demon, but when he manages to take its weapon, he's plunged into an illusion where he's a child again, seeing his whole family inviting him to dinner. The protagonist immediately feels something is off, but is surprised to hear Mika ask about his desire to get stronger and defeat vampires before he eats. Our hero asks if his family is still alive, and Mika says no. Meanwhile, they all start blaming him for abandoning them when the vampire killed them. The demon, using Mika's image, tells him it will give him the power to get revenge if he opens his heart. The demon thinks the protagonist is falling for it, but Yuichiro snaps out of it, realizing Mika would never ask him to seek revenge, causing the illusion to shatter. Threatening the demon, a furious Yuichiro questions how it dares to impersonate his family, and the demon reveals its true form. Next, the protagonist wakes up, confused about what happened. Shinoa explains he was under the demon's illusion, but managed to exercise it with his willpower. The protagonist asks if he finally got his weapon, but Shinoa says not yet. Gurren will be the one to assign it. Yuichiro laughs, saying now Gurren will have to acknowledge his power since he defeated a demon. Shinoa confirms that he will now attend the Annihilation Force's training school. Hearing this, our boy gets super excited and decides to proudly take on the task of learning to kill vampires. Meanwhile, Farid is alive and talking with Mika, who also survived and has become a vampire. Farid reports that he's found the protagonist, and that he's being used by humans. One night, a horseman of the apocalypse suddenly appears, causing destruction and terror. However, Michaela steps in its path with his demonic sword and easily defeats it with a single strike. The people are amazed and happy to have a protector, but Michaela's companions mock them, knowing they're just getting more livestock. During their conversation, they question Michaela, as he became a vampire by drinking the blood of the third progenitor, Cruel Tepes. One of the vampires despises Michaela, considering him just as miserable and greedy as humans. Michaela tells him they can do whatever they want. He's not in it for the glory. After this, the vampires announce to the district's population that they're now under their control and protection. Michaela saves a young man who then offers him his blood as thanks, which triggers a memory for Michaela from before he lost his humanity, talking about his escape plan with the protagonist and what happened after he got away. After his escape, guards showed up, and Cruel Tepes arrived, claiming Michaela as her own and asking Farid what happened. Farid compliments Cruel's appearance, but she shuts him down, thinking he's only after her political power. The queen grills Farid for letting the Seraphs escape and leaving one on the brink of death. Farid denies everything and threatens to spill the beans about her research on the Seraph's curse to the council, which infuriates Cruel, and she attacks, easily defeating him. Farid apologizes, surrenders, and promises to stay out of her business. Later, Cruel approaches Michaela and asks if he wants her to grant him eternal life. Although Michaela says no, Cruel forces him to drink her blood through a kiss, causing him to lose all his humanity. In another scene, our hero runs into a guy looking for a fight, and they automatically start brawling. However, he ends up pretty beaten up and tries to dodge the subject. Later, after Yoichi checks on him, Shinoa sees him and teases that he's going to get suspended again, but the protagonist claims it wasn't a fight. He just ran into a lamppost. Shinoa's like, "Alright, I'll let it slide this time," and asks the guys if they're excited to start training. Our hero, as usual, complains and asks when they'll let him go fight. Shinoa tells him if he wants to skip training, that's fine, but he'll have to go into battle with no weapons and no uniform. Afterwards, Shinoa takes him to his new class, where they find Guren half asleep. The lieutenant colonel introduces them as exchange students and makes them introduce themselves. Yuichiro starts by saying he didn't come to make friends and has no intention of getting along with anyone, ending with, "You're all wasting your time, because the most powerful weapon is gonna be mine." Guren scolds this ugly boy and sends him to his seat, where he discovers it's occupied by the guy he just fought. Guren doesn't get what's up with Kimizuki either, since he was sent to the normal school under Shinoa's supervision, so he questions the results. She just replies that the results are standing right in front of him. Meanwhile, the protagonist and Shiho are squaring off to see who's stronger. Guren gets fed up with the situation and knocks them both out cold with a single blow. Next, we see Shiho barging into Guren's office without permission to ask for the demonic weapon test, since he has the best grades. Guren asks why he wants so much power. Shiho retorts that the army knows everything about him, so he doesn't get the question. Guren then reveals he knows he needs the money for his sister's treatment, who caught the virus even as a little kid, and that joining the company would give him access to treatment. But he tells him he won't give him a demonic weapon now because it would just take advantage of his desires and use them against him. Shiho then scoffs, asking what will happen with the protagonist. But Guren reveals that our boy already handled a demon once, which surprises Shiho, but he still claims he's stronger than the protagonist. Guren replies, "That's not enough. Without friends, he can't succeed." Later, the guys are informed they have to pass a preliminary exam for the demonic weapon aptitude test. The first tests are in pairs, so Shinoa teams up with Yoichi, while the protagonist is forced to team up with Shiho. They're first attacked by enchanted puppets, but due to their lack of teamwork, they fail the test and lose points. Then, the instructor gets some news she has to deliver to Shiho. The training is halted, and they inform Shiho that his sister is in critical condition in the infirmary. Despite this, Shiho decides to continue training, but the protagonist advises him to go to his sister and not abandon her, because she could die at any moment, and he'd regret it. The protagonist then punches Shiho in the face to snap him out of it, since he just wanted to keep training. At the hospital, Shiho promises to get into the company, and then transfer his sister to the military hospital. The two guys have a motivational chat at the end of the night, encouraging each other and promising not to give up. Finally, we see a meeting of the Progenitors' Council, worried about a new threat. Cruel proposes wiping out the Japanese Imperial Demon Army to end the threats and start a new war. Next, we witness a meeting with Major General Tenri Haragi of the Imperial Demon Army, presenting his report on the district and the disturbances caused by vampires in the Kansai area. In the middle of the meeting, Guren, who was sleeping, wakes up and asks if the boring meeting is over yet. General Tenri Shiragi warns him to watch his mouth, but Gurren decides to leave, asking for a summary later. He believes he shouldn't be there since the army is controlled by the Hiragi family, and as an Ichinos, he sees no reason to stay. As he leaves, he complains about the boring meeting, but suddenly the protagonist appears and attacks him. Gurren easily stops him and mocks him, saying he's as predictable as ever and just wants to have fun fighting. The enraged protagonist questions why he disappeared for 10 days without giving him his demonic sword. Gurren decides to give him a quick answer to avoid attracting the Hiragi family's attention. He proposes he sign a contract with a demon and then sends him to the battlefield, but also warns that if he dies, he won't be responsible. Our hero can't believe what he's hearing, but excitedly accepts the contract. Before leaving, Gurren smacks him on the head and warns him never to try a flying kick on him again. Later, the protagonist runs into Shinoa, who asks what happened to his head and if he skipped class to fight. He says no, but she already knew, and says Gurren doesn't know his own strength, but she congratulates him because he's finally been given permission to make a contract with a demon. At night, Michaela is with Farid, who tells him the time has come when he might run into the protagonist. But Mika ignores him and leaves, wandering the city to his old home, only to find it's now inhabited by other children who are terrified to see him. So, Mika has to leave. The next day at the academy, the written exam scores that will determine the rank of each person's demonic weapon are handed out. Our hero tries to hide his score, but Shinoa snatches it from his hands to make fun of him. She tells the group that the protagonist got a legendary score that only geniuses can achieve, a big fat 0. This surprises everyone, but he gets mad at Shinoa, who says she did it to help him become popular. However, this loser repeats that he doesn't need friends or teammates to reach his goal. She mocks him, saying he sounds like a 3-year-old, but Yoichi interrupts, saying maybe Japanese just isn't his thing. Then Shiho makes fun of the protagonist, but he challenges him to show his scores. Shiho shows he got a 100 and wrote in 3 different languages. This leads to a big fight, but Yoichi and the teacher, Sayuri, try to stop them. Gurren arrives and gets the protagonist's attention, who questions him about giving him a demonic weapon. Shiho interrupts with a punch and asks the lieutenant colonel to explain why he abandoned the class for so many days. Gurren mocks the youngsters for thinking they're ready for a demonic weapon, but the boys start arguing and hitting each other again. Meanwhile, Gurren asks Sayuri what she thinks of them and if they're ready to resist the demon's temptation. She says she's not sure, but both are stronger than she was at their age. And surprisingly, Yoichi has the most resistance to demons. Gurren decides to attack them to see if they're all ready, saying if any of them die, it's their own fault for not training enough. Many are affected by Gurren's attack, including Shiho, but the protagonist and Yoichi feel nothing. Gurren congratulates the boys for staying conscious, as they have the potential to make a contract with a demon if they keep training. But he gives extra props to those still standing, as they have the chance to face a real demon and get a demonic weapon of the same rank as his. The Black Demon series. The lucky ones are our hero, Shiho, Yoichi, and Shinoa, although Gurren says he would have preferred if the latter had fainted. As they head to face the demon, Sayuri tells Gurren it might not be a good idea for Yoichi to participate, but he tells her not to worry. If Yoichi isn't strong enough, he'll die, because the world is cruel. He then asks Yoichi if he's willing to risk his life to avenge his sister, and if not, he should leave. The other guys advise Yoichi to go, but he refuses and decides to stay to protect what he loves most. As they go down in the elevator, everyone tries to calm Yoichi down since there's no turning back. However, Shinoa questions Shiho if he's sure, since he was barely standing by, holding on to the table earlier. Then Gurren scolds the protagonist for being overconfident and warns him that this demon is nothing like the one he defeated before. They finally arrive at the place where the weapons housing the most powerful demons are kept. Our hero asks what they should do. As soon as they touch the weapon, the ritual will begin. If they defeat the demon, its power will be theirs. But if they fail, they'll become demons or die. Either way, they're gonna die. First up is our protagonist, who steps forward with determination and demands the demon hand over its power. Now, we're in a memory of Yoichi, who remembers the vampire that killed his sister is named Lacus. As he sees his dead sister and tries to touch her, a demon takes her form and tells him he's reliving memories. Little Yoichi asks his sister if she's alive, but the demon says she's not. Next, it's Shiho's turn, who is talking with his sister. The demon tries to break him emotionally, calling him a selfish human who only thinks of himself. Shiho realizes it's the demon, and it replies that it's not a simple hallucination, but hidden memories in his heart. Meanwhile, Guren watches the youths and thinks at least one of them will make it after seeing Shiho. We then shift to the protagonist's illusion, where he meets Mika again. Our hero tells the demon to stop wasting its time imitating his family. The demon is surprised that the protagonist doesn't care about his family. However, the protagonist replies that he knows the demon's mind games and demands its power. The demon manifests and attacks, managing to trap him with its ability. It questions if he thinks that just because he beat a low-level demon, he can face a demon like her, threatening to play with his heart as it pleases. But our hero doesn't care and keeps demanding its power. The demon asks what he wants the power for. The protagonist says he wants it to avenge his family. The demon agrees to give him infinite power but warns it won't be enough. Taking the form of a Kani, it tells him he must devote his life to revenge and tries to make him feel guilty for abandoning his family. It also tells him he must give up love and not replace his old family with new friends, forgetting them. The protagonist demands the demon shut up, but when it doesn't, he gets enraged and forcefully demands its power to protect those he cares about. Finally, the demon accepts the protagonist, but only as long as his heart remains strong. If he ever doubts, the demon will take control of his body. It then introduces itself as Asuramaru and, before leaving, reveals to the protagonist that he's not entirely human. At least a tenth of him isn't. Although the protagonist doesn't understand, Asuramaru reveals its form and seals the deal. After waking up, the protagonist gets teased by Shiho for taking so long. Yuichiro asks about Yoichi, but is told he hasn't woken up yet. Meanwhile, in Yoichi's illusion, he's still talking to the demon, who asks if he wants its power, since his heart holds no desire for revenge, only good feelings and thoughts humans loathe. The demon demands he give it his body to avenge his sister, since he doesn't have the will to do it, and attacks him. Seeing a terrified Yoichi, the demon tells him he's not fit to be its master, managing to take over his body and wake up. Guren is annoyed by the situation, but happy to have 2 wins out of 3. He then assigns the boys their first mission with company members. They must defeat the Devourer Demon. The Devourer Demon attacks Guren first, but fails. So it then decides to attack the protagonist and Shiho, but can't harm them either. The protagonist asks Guren what they should really do, as he doesn't want to kill his comrade. However, Guren tells them to end his suffering. He's no longer their comrade, just a demon. The protagonist refuses once more, but Guren demands he follow orders, saying if they want to die, he won't intervene. He tells them if they have any pride left as soldiers, they must finish the demon. The boys decide to fight the demon and manage to disarm it, letting their guard down. But before Guren can warn them, the demon attacks the protagonist. Shiho takes the opportunity to finish it, but stops, unable to kill Yoichi. The demon mocks them for not being able to kill it, while they try to convince Yoichi not to give up and fight the demon. Shinoa tries to get Guren to intervene, as the boys aren't ready to kill their friend. Guren realizes Shinoa has feelings for these kids and orders her to step in to spare them the remorse, but Shinoa can't do it. Our hero keeps trying to get Yoichi to fight, but it's no use. Before the demon can attack, Yuichiro gives up and asks it to kill him, since he won't murder a friend. But before it can strike, Guren scolds Yoichi, telling him to protect his family and stop hiding. This manages to wake Yoichi up after an internal struggle, and the first thing he does is run to hug the protagonist. Suddenly, Guren hits the protagonist with a powerful kick for taking so long, knocking him to the ground. Shinoa questions Guren if he knew what would happen, and teases that he cares about the boys, too. Guren tells her that Yoichi has talent, and encourages him to follow his will to protect his friends, telling him to forget his meaningless revenge. The protagonist must do the same, forget his old family, and now risk his life for his new one, because there's nothing left in the past. Finally, Gurren informs them they'll be sent to the battlefield in Kansai, as there are vampires who want to conquer Shinjuku. We then cut to a plane full of vampires, including Mika, heading to Shinjuku City. At night, the protagonist sleeps but is tormented by a dream where Mika blames him for abandoning him. Our hero wakes up, happy that the day he's been waiting for has finally come. It's time to kill some vampires. Next, the protagonist is on the subway with Shinoa, who will accompany him that day. During the ride, she gives him the day's orders, but all this clown cares about is starting his revenge. Shinoa tries to tell him they must first strengthen the defenses, and the protagonist complains about having to do that first. In Shinjuku, the youths arrive at a protected gate that will lead them outside the city walls. The guards are surprised to see kids who are part of the special forces. After crossing the gate, they hear someone complaining to Gurren about not wanting a group of rookies assigned to them, and decide to investigate. On the way, they meet Yoichi and Shiho, who have been there since early morning. We then hear what the girl is really complaining about to Gurren. She wanted to be the leader due to her experience, but that role will be filled by Shinoa Haragi. When Shinoa sees the girl, she greets her as Mitsuba, who is visibly angry with her. Mitsuba lunges at Shinoa to start a fight, but Gurren interrupts and threatens to send them to the dungeon if they keep it up. Then, Gurren informs the kids that he'll be taking another route to Shinjuku. First, he introduces their new teammate, Mitsuba Sangu. He explains that teams in the company must have 5 members, or they'd be in danger against an armed vampire. He also demands they act as a team when facing a threat, though the protagonist doesn't seem to get it, so Mitsuba throws a punch at him, but he stops it. Gurren then assigns their mission. They must go to Harajuku to free the humans from the vampire settlement used for blood, and then they can head to Shinjuku. On the way to Harajuku, Yoichi can't believe how destroyed the world is and asks the others if they used to guard these walls, defeating the horsemen of the apocalypse. Meanwhile, Mitsuba interrupts, saying the horsemen are much stronger now that they're far from the wall. They finally arrive in Harajuku, and the first thing they see is a little girl running from a horseman. The protagonist tries to save her, but Mitsuba stops him, ordering him not to break formation, as it could be a trap. Yu gets furious and tells them to retreat then, because he's going to save her alone. The protagonist starts running to save the girl, and Mitsuba goes after him. The rest of the team tries to help, but Shinoa immediately stops them, sensing approaching vampires. She says they used the girl as bait. The protagonist saves the girl just in time, and Mitsuba finishes off the horsemen, which makes the vampires reveal themselves and attack. Yu faces 3 vampires, and when they manage to wound him a little, our hero, seeing he's in a tight spot, borrows Asura Maru's power. This surprises the vampires. Then, Mitsuba warns the protagonist that he's about to be attacked by the horseman that didn't die, but Shinoa protects him, and in turn, Yoichi protects Shinoa, so that in the end, Mitsuba finishes off the monster. We see the vampires want to retreat and call for reinforcements because the kids are part of the vampire annihilation forces, but the protagonist attacks them by surprise. Even so, Mitsuba orders the protagonist to retreat before that happens. The vampires mock them, saying they won't let the livestock go, which infuriates Yu, who gets ready to attack but receives orders from Shinoa that they must retreat since they're in enemy territory. At night, Mitsuba hits and scolds the protagonist for endangering the entire team with his reckless actions. Yu accepts his mistake but says he doesn't regret it. If it makes her feel better, she can hit him all she wants. She tells him she hates people like him because they lead their team to ruin. They then hand the girl over to the army to be safe. Finally, Shinoa tells the protagonist that's just how Mitsuba is, but to treat her kindly as she has a troubled past. Next, we see the girls taking a bath while Mitsuba complains about the protagonist, and Shinoa tells her they'll end up falling in love. But Shinoa also asks if she hates the protagonist because he reminds her of how she used to be in the past. Mitsuba remembers when one of her comrades died because she broke formation. Although Shinoa tries to free her from her guilt, she's still angry. Later, we see the little girl telling them that the vampires are at Omotesando Station. So the next day, they head there to rescue the humans. On the way, Mitsuba says they shouldn't worry about civilians, and that if the vampires are armed, they must flee. But Yu doesn't like this, since he wants to kill vampires. Arriving at the station gates, Shinoa tells them she hopes they can complete the mission with no casualties, so they shouldn't act impulsively. The leader, Shinoa, begins to explain the plan. Inside the station, there are 7 vampires who will hopefully all be asleep. However, they must stay together, protect each other, and not break formation. Upon entering, they find humans dressed like livestock, which brings back memories for our hero. Mitsuba takes the lead and tells them they need to head to floor B2, where all the vampires are. As they walk, Shiho finds it strange that the humans don't escape, since there are no vampires present. Mitsuba explains they stay there for protection, as the outside is plagued with monsters. At that moment, the first vampire appears. Mitsuba orders them to ready their weapons, but the protagonist rushes forward and attacks the vampire, piercing it with his sword and defeating it. Mitsuba scolds Yu, but he argues that he wasn't being reckless. He waited for all the orders and took the opportunity to attack an unarmed enemy. He also saves Mitsuba from a surprise attack from behind. The protagonist gets excited facing the vampires and launches into an attack while his enemy mocks him. However, he manages to defeat him with a single blow. Before he can finish, Mitsuba is shocked by the protagonist's strength, and Shiho comments that he's still weaker than him. So, our hero proposes they duel right then and there, but Mitsuba orders them to stop being idiots. They keep moving through the station, but are ambushed by their enemies. As there are more than 5 vampires left, Mitsuba is the first to be captured and realizes they used the little girl as a decoy to feed them false info. She orders her teammates to retreat, but this clown refuses to abandon her and tries to rescue her. As they head towards her, the rest of the team fights off the vampires. The protagonist manages to reach Mitsuba and saves her by slicing the vampire, holding her hostage in half. Then Yu tells the vampires that if they thought humans were disgusting, they should wait and see how they get defeated by these very humans, ready to give his all to save his loved one. In the center of the battle formation, surrounded by vampires, the kids agree they can take them all down, but they wait for Mitsuba's order to attack. They finally manage to rescue everyone. At the rescue camp, the little girl approaches the protagonist to apologize for what she did. As she cries, our hero calms her down, telling her she just wanted to protect her family and friends and did the right thing. As Mitsuba watches this, Shinoa teases her, implying she's fallen for the protagonist. After being rescued, Mitsuba says she doesn't understand why Yu acts this way. Shinoa tells her it's because Yu was a prisoner when he was little. Later, Mitsuba confronts the protagonist about his past, but he tells her not to dig into it. Still, she tells him that from her point of view, he did nothing wrong. Yu, looking sad, tells her maybe not, but he left his family behind to save himself, and that's never going to change. Before she leaves, Mitsuba tries to thank the protagonist for what he did, but can't get the words out and gets angry. From above, a woman watches them all. The next day, our hero is amazed to see that Shiho knows how to start an abandoned car, so he asks to drive it for a bit. Shiho tells him he doesn't know how, but the protagonist insists it'll just be for a little while. He gets a hard no from Shiho, who says he'll teach him to drive later. The kids then gather for lunch while Shiho tells them he got the car started. However, our boy isn't listening and just steals the car, almost running him over. After crashing it, the protagonist tells Shiho to get in, claiming he'll drive them to Shinjuku, which infuriates Shiho. As the rest of the team watches from a distance, Shinoa tells them to hop into the Shinoa Mobile to lead the way to Shinjuku. And although everyone wanted to drive, after making fun of Shinoa's height, Shiho ends up behind the wheel. As they drive, they hear noises and think it's the horsemen of the apocalypse, so they're not worried. However, Mitsuba informs them those are noises from the city, and Shiho orders them to stay alert. As they turn a corner, they reach the walls of Shinjuku and see the city is completely destroyed. Right in front of them, they see a noble walking their way. So, our genius protagonist orders them not to stop the car and just run him over. However, the vampire stops the car with one hand and activates his sword to defend against their attacks. Shinoa gets worried about his power and tells the kids to be careful, as he has a high-rank weapon. But at that moment, the vampire takes the chance to attack Shinoa, though the protagonist manages to save her just in time. Shinoa thinks that to beat him, they'll have to send the protagonist and Shiho to fight him one-on-one, while the rest provide support. However, two more vampires show up as backup, so Yu suggests they retreat. Shinoa tells him that's not possible, so they have to use all their demonic power to attack, and even then, they might die. The protagonist just smiles and promises he won't let anyone die. That's what he has Asuramaru's power for. Then, one of the backup vamps asks Lord Crowley what he's doing here, and informs him that Farid needs him on the front lines. To not keep him waiting, he tells the kids he'll let them run away. Shinoa breathes a sigh of relief as he leaves, but our hero is filled with rage at the massive power gap between them. Shinoa tells him if he learns some enchantments, that gap will shrink a lot. The protagonist demands she teach him, but she flat out refuses, since that would mean only he would fight the vampires head-on while the rest of them die. Instead, she urges them to work as a team, though she's glad this loser actually suggested retreating for once. Next, we cut to the Shinjuku defenses, where the army is trying to fend off helicopters full of vampires. After shooting down a few, they get orders to wait for the fourth wave and hold out as long as possible, or Shinjuku won't stand. But then, they see a plane heading straight for them, not knowing it's loaded with explosives. And just like that, the vampires breach the city walls. We then see the kids arrive in the city and witness the chaos inside because the eastern wall has fallen. Suddenly, two helicopters appear and attack their position with missiles, but they manage to get to safety. Yoichi, seeing them get shot down with arrows, asks if the rest of the army also has demonic weapons. But the girls inform him they're runic weapons, which are like simplified demonic ones. Our hero sees a helicopter heading their way to attack again, and manages to take cover. Hundreds of vampires descend from it, so they prepare to fight alongside the army. After a fierce battle where the kids actually worked as a team, they manage to defeat all the vampires. Corporal Nagai thanks them for their help and is hopeful knowing they're from the Moon Demon Company. As the kids take in the situation, they conclude this is way more serious than they were told. The corporal informs them that the vampires have breached the West Wall, so he needs their help to fight them. Our hero replies that's what they came for, and the corporal takes them to the Western Combat Zone. From a rooftop, Guren observes they're not doing too well and wants to know who's in command. He spots Michaela with Farid, who detects him from far away, but Sayuri tells him to stop wasting time. Guren replies he's setting up observation posts, since the vampires will surely do the same. Just then, a vampire tries to attack Sayuri from behind, but Mito arrives just in time and defeats it, followed by Guren's entire squad. Guren asks Shigur how the protagonist and the other kids are doing, and she informs him they've arrived in the city. Guren tells his group they need to defeat the enemy commander to tip the scales in their favor. Later, we see Farid asking Mika if he feels nostalgic seeing Tokyo again. He then asks if he's thirsty, since he should take advantage of the battlefield to drink some blood. Farid reminds him of everything that happened with his family, and Mika gets furious with himself for not being able to protect them. We then flash back 4 years, where Cruel forces Mika to drink blood to gain power and eternal youth, but he refuses, preferring to die rather than become a vampire. Cruel tells him it's too late for that. If he dies now, he'll just become a stupid demon. Mika continues to refuse, so Cruel offers him her blood. He rejects it, but can't resist for long and starts drinking. Cruel is thrilled, as Mika will now be her little pet for all eternity. Back in the present, Mika only has enough of Cruel's blood for 10 days, so he needs to find the protagonist ASAP. As it starts to rain, we see Nagai informing the kids they'll reach the defense line in 15 minutes. So, Shinoa tells them they'll start their first training lesson. According to Mitsuba, in their current state, they'll be useless on the front lines. They need to take some pills the army provides, to strengthen their powers and demonic synchronization, getting a 1.5x boost in strength with 1 pill and 1.8x with 2. Our hero gets excited, thinking if he takes a bunch, he'll be super strong. But Shinoa warns him that if he takes more than 3, his internal organs will turn to mush. The girls add that the effect only lasts 15 minutes and takes 10 seconds to kick in, leaving him vulnerable. Finally, this clown asks if this will unlock his demonic weapon's maximum power, but Shinoa says no, that comes from studying and practice. But there's no time for that now. Before reaching their destination, they're attacked, and the protagonist sees the corporal get injured, so he runs to save him. The kids work together to pull off the rescue, but the helicopter still launches missiles that cause the protagonist, Shinoa, and the corporal to fall into a subway tunnel. As they plan how to help the corporal, they hear Shiho's voice from the other side of the rubble. He tells them they also fell into the tunnel, but have a way out. The protagonist orders them to get to the exit while he and Shinoa find another way. On the surface, Gurren prepares to face Mika. Farid approaches Mika, lamenting the casualties from Gurren's attack, and mentions that the humans are using their best fighters, pointing out that Gurren belongs to the Vampire Annihilation Force, the Moon Demon Company. He orders his subordinates to attack Gurren's unit. Meanwhile, Gurren invokes the power of his sword, Mahiru no Yo, and tells them to enjoy their last meal, motivating his people by saying, if they win this battle, they win the war. Next, we see a memory of Yu, where he and Mika are reading. Mika asks what he would do if he could escape the city, but our hero replies that the outside world is totally dead. However, Mika tells him to imagine a situation where they could escape and live outside without the virus. The protagonist thinks that would be awesome. Mika tells him to try harder then, before leaving. Although Yu didn't get it back then, in the present, he realizes he was wrong. The outside world is no paradise. Shinoa approaches the protagonist to tell him the corporal is safe and that Gurren has sent new orders. Gurren is fighting the main vampire force at the intersection of 5th Street in West Shinjuku and needs them to join him. Yu says if they defeat the vampires, they'll win the battle. Shinoa replies that maybe the vampires think the same and consider defeating the lieutenant colonel a victory in itself. Therefore, she suggests they hurry to meet the others at the defense line. On their way, they hear wounded soldiers expressing their doubts about the Annihilation forces, asking for help since they're just kids and believe they'll be defeated soon. The protagonist goes over to ask where they are so he can go help his friends, and the soldier informs him they're in Shinjuku Central Park. Yu tells Shinoa that he and she will take care of it, and that they should send the platoons to the defense line. Shinoa tries to stop this clown, telling him he shouldn't act on assumptions about who and where his friends are, and their priority should be reinforcing Gurren, as they're the only ones who can help him. The protagonist ignores her and keeps walking towards the Central Park. At the defense line, Gurren and his comrades are fighting numerous vampires. Gurren complains that more enemies keep coming. Sayuri proposes that she and Mito cover him so he can attack the vampire commander. Meanwhile, Ferret comments that everything would be more interesting if Crowley had arrived on time. He orders Lacus and Renee to distract all the humans except Gurren, and tells Mika it's time to show his power as they prepare to attack Gurren together. However, Mika says he'll handle the arrogant human who attacked him with his sword all by himself. Back with the protagonist, we see Shinoa decides to go with him, and he thanks her. When they reach the Central Park, they see their teammates are defeating the vampires but are completely exhausted. Shiho, after saving Yoichi, comments that he never imagined fighting without the protagonist, and Shinoa would be so hard. While they're fighting, a vampire attacks Shiho from behind, but Yu arrives just in time to save him. He asks where the other enemies are, but is disappointed to learn he just killed the last one. Shiho confronts the protagonist and scolds him for not following the plan to regroup at the defense line. Our hero apologizes but says if they face the same situation tomorrow, he'd do it again, because it's not just about trust, but about doing it as many times as necessary. This earns him some teasing from his teammates for being stubborn. Finally, the whole group heads to the defense lines. In the battle, the situation is still a stalemate as Gurren fights Mika. Both are very strong and can't gain an advantage. Guren tries to place an explosive on Mika's forehead, but he dodges it as the explosion is too slow and Guren's ancient spells don't work. On the vampire side, Ferret appears to praise Mika and warns him to stop being so arrogant, or he'll die. He offers his help, but Mika refuses, claiming he won't lose. However, Mika doesn't realize he's standing on a trap set by Shigur. Guren then orders his team to begin their joint attacks. Shigur and Goshi attack, but miss. Just as Guren is about to kill Mika, Ferret saves him at the last second and tells him he owes him one. Guren is sent flying by Ferret's blow and complains that he's too powerful. Ferret suggests they work together, but Mika refuses now that he knows his enemy's moves. Mika readies his sword and prepares to attack, so Guren decides to take a second power pill while his teammates advise against it, saying he'll die. Guren asks Mika, if he's such a gentleman, to give him 20 seconds to take his medicine. However, Mika attacks him directly and warns him he'll stop holding back, threatening to kill him. Just before Mika kills Guren, the kids arrive, but aren't fast enough. Mika runs Guren through with his sword, unleashing the protagonist's fury. He can't see the face of the one who hurt Guren, and runs him through with his own sword, causing both Mika and Yuichiro to be shocked when they come face to face. None of the kids can believe what's happening. Guren yells at this ugly boy to activate his sword and finish Mika. Since the protagonist doesn't do it, Guren gets up and tries to do it himself, but fails. Badly wounded, Guren gets up with what little strength he has left and punches the protagonist for not acting. Yu is still in shock, unable to process what's happening. Guren warns him not to let his guard down, and the other kids ask why he didn't kill the enemy. The protagonist confesses it was Mika, someone from his family, and proceeds to confirm if it's really his brother. The boys are overjoyed at their reunion, even though they're on opposite sides. Ferret mocks them and teases Mika, who got his long-awaited reunion, asking what he'll do now. Under Ferret's influence, Mika says he'll save the protagonist from the greedy humans who are using him. However, Ferret tells him that as long as he's human, they can't coexist, and suggests Cruel turn him too. Mika vehemently opposes this and threatens to kill Ferret if he gets near the protagonist. Ferret agrees, but offers to help by distracting the other humans. Meanwhile, Mika looks at the protagonist and laments that his human friends are just using him for their own benefit because of his good nature. Finally, Ferret orders the battle to begin, killing everyone except Yu. At that moment, Crowley joins the fight, and Ferret now proposes not to kill them but to capture them as livestock for feeding in an operation called domestication. Seeing another noble has arrived, Guren orders a full retreat of all troops. However, the protagonist refuses to leave his family there. Guren asks if he wants everyone to stay and die. The protagonist understands and begins the retreat, planning to maintain formation until they reach the second defensive line. But Ferret stops them, causing Yu to fly into a rage and attack uncontrollably. Guren tries to save him but gets injured again. Then, Mito tries to flee to help Guren, but is stopped by a vampire. Mito suggests killing them all, but Yoichi says it won't be that simple. As the kids continue to fight the vampires, Yoichi spots his sister's killer. Crowley happily interrupts, finding him again, and promises not to leave him alone. Then we see Ferret about to finish off Guren, but our hero runs to his aid. However, Ferret dodges him, getting behind him and threatening to taste his blood. Mika automatically slices off his arm and proposes to the protagonist that they leave everything behind and run away together. But this clown refuses and scolds him for being with Ferret. Mika just grabs the protagonist in his arms and flies off, totally enraging Yu. When Yu manages to break free, he confronts him, demanding to know why he says the humans are using him. Then he realizes Mika is no longer human and thinks it's all his fault. But Mika tells him he's not to blame at all and begs him to come with him. Yu refuses because he won't abandon his friends. He then sees Shinoa about to be defeated. The protagonist wants to help her, but Mika stops him, saying those people mean nothing anymore. But Yu keeps watching as his friends are bitten by vampires, which drives him to despair. Although his friends tell him to escape, the protagonist enters a trance where he meets Asura Maru. He asks if she's trying to take control of his body, but she says she's not doing anything and is just scared of him. She tells him to follow Mika's advice because the humans did something to him. Next, trumpets sound from the sky, and angels appear, indicating the protagonist has lost his humanity and unleashed the monster within. A massive amount of demonic power erupts from Yu, granting him insane strength. Every punch he throws causes bloodshed and destroys the place. Thanks to this power, he's on par with Crowley and manages to corner him while Mika tries to stop him. But Crowley goes to Farit, who is interrogating Gurren about the power surge and ironically confirms it's an experiment. Then the protagonist turns to kill Shinoa, having no control over his body. Gurren tells Shinoa to find a way to bring him back. Just as the protagonist is about to murder Shinoa, Mika jumps in between and takes the sword blow. But Yu doesn't seem to react and continues his mission, kill everyone. Meanwhile, Gurren orders Shinoa to do something or they'll all die. So Shinoa throws herself at the protagonist and hugs him, begging him to stop. Suddenly, our hero seems to regain consciousness and finally passes out. Gurren laughs at Farit, telling him that was his ace up the sleeve. Farit says it's a shame it didn't do anything, but Gurren replies he just needed to buy time for Shinya Haragi to get into position and that the entire Haragi army will be arriving soon to take control. And now we see Shinya descending some stairs, remembering that at the end of the battle, he wanted to ask Gurren what happened. However, Gurren told him he wasn't interested in his questions and to stay away from him. Shinoa finally reaches a restricted area where she identifies herself as a member of the army's vampire annihilation forces. Despite this, the guard denies her entry, as only those with a rank higher than commander can enter. Shinoa asks what this place is, and the guard tells her it's a secret. But the other guard reveals it's a vampire experimentation lab for finding their weak points. Shinoa insists on going in, but when they refuse, she shows her family's identification symbol, which gets her in. After passing through the door, she finds a high-tech lab and realizes Gurren is in charge, whom she hasn't seen in 5 days. She confronts him, asking if he thinks he did the right thing with the protagonist, who still hasn't woken up. She also questions his plans for Yu, since he gave him different pills based on her recommendations. Shinoa believes those pills made Yu lose control, but Gurren starts having an existential crisis about what humanity must do to survive, and asks what would have happened if her sister, Mahiru Haragi, hadn't invented demonic weapons. Finally, Gurren tells her not to come complaining with her idealistic problems, and teases that Shinoa is in love with the protagonist. He tells her to go home since he's not a love counselor. But before Shinoa leaves, Gurren informs her that the pill's effect will wear off in 5 days, so she should go tell the protagonist. That's why Shinoa visits our hero in the infirmary, waiting for him to wake up. She also wonders if she's really in love. Then we flash to a memory of Mika, who still wants to rescue Yu. However, Farit stops him, saying it's impossible since the humans have him trapped in their lies. Farit keeps questioning Mika about what he is, since he hates both human and vampires. Mika tries to punch Farit again, but he stops him, saying he's had enough fun, and they both flee. Next, we see Mika getting out of a detox pod, thinking it's the first time he's cried since becoming a vampire. Meanwhile, in the locker room, the other vampires complain that even though they fought humans, they put up a good fight. But Mika ignores them. During the conversation, he hears that the High Council is very worried because the humans are conducting forbidden research that could destroy the world. The Seraph of the End research is mentioned, which was apparently supposed to be brought back from Shinjuku. They then ask Mika if he knows anything about it, since he knew him before, referring to the protagonist. They also ask what he considers himself, but if he doesn't want to answer, they'll make him talk another way. Mika turns and says he's just an ugly vampire, leaving the other vampires confused. Next, Mika is told he must report to Cruel at night. We see the protagonist finally waking up and finding Yoichi asleep by his side. He wakes him up to ask what happened, but Yoichi, upon seeing him, hugs him excitedly and says he has to tell the others. But before leaving, Yoichi informs him that everyone is fine and that he was in a coma for a week, which relieves the protagonist. But then he starts to cry, realizing that Mika is still alive, and what he saw wasn't just a dream. Then Shinoa peeks through the door, teasingly asking if this is the crybaby's room, but she says it's understandable since he found out Mika is totally alive. However, the protagonist tells her he barely remembers anything that happened. Shinoa tells him they all almost died when he passed out, but reinforcements arrived just in time. Kureto and Shinya Haragi, who managed to kill the normal vampires and take prisoners, but the nobles escape. Yu asks what happened to Mika, and Shinoa tells him the vampires took him. She then tells him not to try escaping the hospital, to go to the vampire capital, and Yu promises he won't. The protagonist thanks Shinoa for her concern, but notices her wound and touches her neck, which makes Shinoa nervous, barely managing to say she's fine. At that moment, Mitsuba enters the room and sees the two in a weird situation, scolding Shinoa for what she's doing. However, she explains the situation, calming Mitsu down. But when the protagonist sees that Mitsu was also bitten, he worries about her, which also makes her nervous. Shiho and Yoichi also arrive, and Shiho scolds Mitsu for shouting in the hospital. Finally, our hero apologizes for worrying everyone and thanks them for being his friends. But the guys start making fun of him, unable to believe what they're hearing. They apologize for not being able to rescue Mika right away, as they were ordered to rest, but the protagonist tells them it's okay and not necessary right now. As they talk, we see what each of the key players in this war is up to. In the end, the protagonist looks out the window, grateful for being so lucky, and promises to save Mika. But Mika, in the vampire capital, in turn, promises to save Yu. Finally, we see Ferret despising both humans and vampires equally as he hands over his research to someone mysterious. And that's pretty much the end of the first season, so don't forget to leave a like and a comment, because I always read them all. And without further ado, on to the second season. A new day begins, and we see Shinoa battling Gurren, using her demonic power to the max. She manages to dodge his attacks and get behind him. Gurren says if she wants to kill him, she should do it, and that he doesn't mind dying at her hands. But before doing anything, Shinoa asks if it's because he killed his sister Mahiru, who loved him so much. Gurren says, that's right, he killed her. But Shinoa asks if his sister is still living in his sword, and if Gurren is possessed by her, and that's why he's using Yu under her orders. Then Shinoa stops threatening Gurren and asks that if he won't do right by the protagonist, to please just leave him alone. Gurren doesn't give a straight answer, but hints that his sister might indeed be living in his sword. Next, the young woman walks down a hallway to a library where the protagonist is reading books. Our hero complains about being tired and closes his eyes for just a moment. When he opens them, Shinoa is right beside him. She scolds him for still being here when he should be resting. Yu tells her he's tired of resting so much and also asks what's wrong, as she seems a bit restless. Shinoa says nothing's wrong and picks up a book from the floor to tease the protagonist for reading pervy books. But as she flips through the pages, something catches her eye that leaves her surprised. Before leaving, she asks the protagonist if he's trying to turn Mika back into a human and says she has information that might help him. The protagonist is surprised and begs her to tell him. Shinoa teases him for being so obedient, but says it's rare for a human to become a vampire, as only nobles are allowed to turn humans. So Mika was chosen. The protagonist thinks it must be Ferret who chose to turn him. Although it bothers him, he's grateful Mika is still alive. He then asks Shinoa if she knows how to turn a vampire back into a human, and she immediately says no. The protagonist is disappointed by the answer, but just then, they hear an announcement that the protagonist must report to the executive room. He thinks Gurren is summoning him, but Shinoa corrects him, saying it seems the Haragi family wants to see him, so she advises him to hurry. Before leaving, the protagonist remembers that Shinoa is also a Haragi and asks about the family. After teasing this ugly boy, she tells him the Haragis are full of horrible people, so he needs to be very careful. As he leaves, the protagonist runs into Gurren, who teases him for running off so happily when headquarters calls. Yu tells him not to talk about him like that. Gurren starts listing off how he saved him, and taught him to survive, so if he feels indebted to him, it's payback time. And because it's him, he shouldn't submit to the Haragis. Hearing this, the protagonist gets annoyed and tells him, if that's all it was, not to bother him. He tells him not to worry, as he has no plans to abandon or betray his comrades. The protagonist leaves, and, on his way to the executive room, runs into Mitsuba in the elevator, who was also summoned. Seeing her, Yu asks how it went. She says it went well, just an interview about her performance against the vampires, and then says she might get promoted. The protagonist says that's great, but he doesn't seem interested. Before she leaves, she sadly yells at him to say something, that he also knows she was useless in battle. Then she starts crying in frustration, thinking she's too weak, but will get promoted thanks to her family name. The protagonist approaches her and tells her not to worry. He also says he just realized he has 2 young ladies with important last names on his team, so he congratulates her on her promotion and asks her to help him with his family. Mitsuba confesses to the protagonist that they also asked about that matter. They wanted to find out if he could be a spy. She said she told them that would be impossible because he's too dumb to trick anyone. The protagonist thanks her for trusting him and then leaves in the elevator. As Mitsu leaves, she looks worriedly at the headquarters building. Just then, Shinoa arrives, asking why she's so concerned. Mitsu asks what she's doing here. Shinoa says she was just taking a walk and asks if she was summoned like the protagonist. Mitsu says yes, and that she was promoted to special ensign, but Shinoa teases her, saying she was promoted because of her last name. The girl's attitude changes, and she tells Shinoa that because of what she did, she might get promoted too, but she replies that she won't be promoted. She's going to reject any offers they make. Mitsu says that because she's a Haragi, she can do whatever she wants. Shinoa says, on the contrary, it seems they've abandoned her, and takes the opportunity to ask what information she had to reveal in exchange for her promotion about what happened in the battle. Mitsu says she pretended not to know anything about the incident where the protagonist lost control, and apparently the higher-ups know nothing. They then ask Shinoa if she knows anything yet. The Haragi girl replies that she's not sure, but they shouldn't trust anyone. Now, we see the protagonist arriving where he was summoned. In a dark room, he finds a vampire in the center. The protagonist doesn't understand what's happening, but defeats it easily. Then, the lights turn on, and Kureto Haragi, the general of the army, reveals it's a test they give to suspected traitors. Then they say they want to test his sword skills, but without invoking the demonic curse. The protagonist feels confident he can beat him, but Shinya advises him not to trust his brother's words. Then Kureto invokes his curse and attacks the protagonist with lightning, easily defeating him. He immediately mocks his skill level. Kureto turns his back and congratulates him on his obedience, but Yu quickly attacks him, though he's stopped by Kureto's companion. The protagonist tells him if she hadn't protected him, he'd be dead. Kureto says he regrets what he said and orders Shinya to fight the protagonist. Although he initially refuses, Shinya easily defeats Yu and asks his brother if they've cleared their doubts about him. Yu doesn't understand anything, but Shinya explains that everyone distrusts those who get along with Guren. Now the protagonist is taken to another room, where he can see Yoichi and Shiho being held prisoner and tortured. The protagonist questions Kureto, but he replies they're doing it because the protagonist is a spy and the interview is starting now. If he doesn't answer truthfully, his friends will be killed. Kureto questions how the 3 of them got black demon weapons so quickly, also questioning their objectives and where they came from. The protagonist gets furious, but only succeeds in getting his friends tortured more. Kureto recounts the protagonist's childhood story and asks if it's all true. When the protagonist confirms it, Kureto questions why Guren took him into his family and what he is to Guren, also because he has the last name Hayakuya. Kureto asks if he's a survivor of that sect, but the protagonist says he only has that last name because of the orphanage he lived in. Kureto reveals that the Hayakuya were a powerful magic sect that experimented on children, so he could be one of them, and that's why Guren wants him. But then he asks him to stay under his command. The protagonist asks him to release his friends and says Guren doesn't do these things, so he won't be like him. Finally, the protagonist leaves with his friends. Outside, Mitsu and Shinoa were waiting worriedly. The protagonist sees Gorin and questions him about all the information he got from Kureto about the experiments. Gorin confirms it and confesses he doesn't save anyone he can't use. The protagonist thanks him for saving him and asks if Mika would also be useful to him, and, if so, to help him save him. Gorin replies that the whole team is family, so they will save his family. In the next scene, we see Mika in bad shape from not drinking blood. Ferret offers him a child. Mika manages to resist, which surprises Ferret, who then offers him a seat on the progenitor council. The next night, the protagonist's squad gets together to teach him how to properly use his demonic gear. Mitsu and Shinoa try to get our hero and Shiho to use their weapons right, but warn them not to mess up at the same time, because if both their demons go berserk, the two of them won't be able to do a thing, which is why they're outside the wall. Then Yoichi spots 5 horsemen of the apocalypse heading their way, but Yoichi flexes his power and takes down all 5 at once, which totally shocks the team. This ugly boy complains to Shinoa for training Yoichi more, but Mitsu explains that's not what happened. Yoichi learned it on his own thanks to his knack for controlling the curse. Yoichi says it might be because he talks to his demon a lot in his sleep. The protagonist smirks and decides to summon Asuramaru, performing the blood pact they were supposed to practice. When this happens, everyone gets ready to fight in case he loses control. However, our hero just collapses to the ground. Mitsu tells the rest they have to watch over him until he makes contact with the demon. While waiting around a campfire, Shiho brings up what happened with the Hararagis a few days ago. Shiho says they asked him everything that happened on the battlefield, but he lied just as Shinoa ordered. Still, he wonders if it's right to hide Yu's secret, and questions if this whole teammate thing is just a front for Shinoa to use the protagonist's power. Shinoa then asks him what he's going to do. He replies, nothing, since he's here for his sister, so he'll play along. Mitsu scolds him for talking like that, since Shinoa wants to protect Yu, but Shinoa stops her to ask Yoichi if he thinks the same as Shiho. He says he believes they're doing it to protect Yu, but he needs answers because they're teammates. Shinoa promises to tell him everything after the training is over. Then, Yu starts writhing in pain, so they all hold him down. It seems he's made full contact with the demon. Inside his illusion, our hero sees his mom crying because a child named the Seraph of the End was born, and his father calling him the Devil's Son. Little Yu gets scared when he sees his dad coming at him with a knife, so he tries to run. But when he goes through the door, he sees his entire orphanage family dead. As he cries, he gets stabbed in the back, and his father tells him he should have died there, but instead, he ran away, and everyone died because of him. As we see the demon biting the protagonist, ordering him to destroy everything, Yu realizes it's an illusion from Asuramaru. He tells her he won't lose control over this because of the promise he made to his family. Now the demon takes the form of Mika, who asks him to defend their family together, and the protagonist promises to save him. Our hero manages to wake from the illusion and confronts Asuramaru, who thought she had already won. But Yu tells her he knows her game. Asuramaru replies that he's not fooling her. He's a devil abandoned by his family. But this loser responds that as long as Mika and the others need him, he doesn't care about being a devil. Asuramaru congratulates him on getting stronger, but is annoyed by his cockiness, so she decides to attack. But the protagonist throws his sword, saying he doesn't want to hurt her because he needs her help to save Mika. The demon asks what's in it for her, and he replies they'll be partners. She doesn't have to live a life of solitude. Finally, Yu wakes up from the illusion and asks his teammates if he caused any trouble. The guys say yes, but they're glad he's back and ask if he succeeded. The protagonist confirms he did. Mitsu says she's tired, so Shiho's training will have to wait until next week. And, although Shiho gets mad, everyone agrees with Mitsu. Shinoa, worried about the protagonist, asks if the demon hurt his heart. He says no, and thanks to them, he's not alone anymore, which surprises Shinoa. Next, Farid tells the council that humans are a flawed species driven by greed, which is why they delve into forbidden research. To prove it, he brings in Mika, who shows a video of the destruction our hero caused when he lost control. This worries everyone present. Farid claims the humans are on their way to controlling the Seraph of the End, making them a huge threat to vampires. But he says Queen Cruel ended the research when she wiped out the Hyakuya. Cruel confirms she did it 8 years ago, when she finished off all the orphanage children with the Seraph of the End factor. Farid, while looking at Mika, asks her again if she really finished off all of them. Others present then ask how they advanced so far with the research, since no one besides Hyakuya had investigated so much. So if Cruel didn't achieve her full objective, all the responsibility would fall on her. But Cruel silences Lestkar, threatening to start a fight. He replies that if she doesn't fulfill her responsibilities, he might just take the throne of Japan, since he's much more powerful. Farid interrupts and asks Cruel what they're going to do to stop the humans. Cruel replies that the current objective stands. They must exterminate the Japanese Imperial Demon Army. Then another one present asks Farid who the boy with him is, while Cruel watches worriedly. After the meeting, Cruel confronts Farid about his actions and asks if he's trying to overthrow her. Farid mocks her, saying she's so scared, but she can't kill him because then his information might reach the council. If that happens, the council will find out they let you escape, and the responsibility would fall on him too, and he'd be sentenced to death. So he proposes they be on the same team, since they're now accomplices in a crime. Then he leaves, laughing, saying it's a joke, but that they'll get along better soon. Mika watches a furious Cruel, and when he tries to talk to her, the vampire ignores him. At night, we see the protagonist's team trying to control Shiho during his training. Our hero is worried and asks if this is normal. The girls say no, that Shiho might have been dominated by the demon. Shinoa tells them to prepare for the worst. Inside Shiho's illusion, he's desperately battling Kisekio, but is defeated, so the demon says his body now belongs to her. Now we see a young Shiho with his sister as someone knocks on the door. It's his childhood friends, who tell him to abandon Mirai for being a burden, but he refuses. One of his friends tells him to kill her as an act of mercy, since she had asked for it. Faced with their threats, Shiho punches him and runs away with his sister, who begs him to kill her so she won't be a burden. The demon suddenly starts questioning Shiho about what he felt at that moment and tells him to be free. Shiho apologizes to his sister and tells her he met the protagonist, who, despite infuriating him, motivates him to be much better. Finally, Shiho manages to defeat the demon and wakes up. The first thing he does is show off his power to the protagonist, immediately starting a battle where he demonstrates his new skills. But then Yoichi stops them. What they just saw surprises the girls, who don't understand what Guren did to bring them together. Then they discover that someone has erased the entire history of their 3 teammates, so they have no idea what's going on. Now we see a boy in the vampire capital using pigeons as messengers. The one receiving them in the city is a member of the army, who takes the information to Kureto, who asks for Guren to be summoned. Next, we see the protagonist complaining about his out-of-control hair, while Shiho makes fun of him. The guys head to breakfast with their teammates, but when they get there, they hear a scream from the kitchen and see the girls arguing about burning the rice. So Shiho steps in to show them how it's done. The guy ends up making breakfast for everyone. As they get ready to eat, our hero praises Shiho, saying he can do everything. But he replies that it's not that he can do everything, it's that they can't do anything. This ugly boy then asks what the secret topic they need to discuss is, since he's the only one out of the loop. Shinoa says there are 2 things to talk about. First, Yu was subjected to experiments, which made him lose control on the battlefield. And second, they need to figure out if Guren is really on their team. The protagonist is shocked to hear them questioning Guren's loyalty. Shinoa says he might be using all of them, including him. Mitsu says if he is loyal, maybe they're planning a fight against High Command, or something even bigger. The protagonist looks at Shiho to see what he thinks, but Shiho says it's the first time he's hearing about this. Shinoa asks them if, knowing this, they should still follow Gurren and how they should face the world. After deciding on their stance, Mitsu proposes they all make a decision as a team. Shiho says that depending on the situation, they might have to abandon Gurren, but the surprised protagonist can't comprehend what they're suggesting. Now we see desperate and lost vampires, prisoners of Kureto. Kureto calls out Gurren for being late, and Gurren asks about his experiment with cursed gear. Kureto says he's doing it to find a more efficient way to turn vampires into demons. But it's not working, maybe because they're low-level vampires. So, he orders them to be killed. Gurren replies that he doesn't take orders from him and wants to know why he was summoned. Kureto asks if he came alone, and if he didn't think he might want to kill him. Gurren says he followed his orders and has no reason to kill him. Besides, he won't as long as he's useful. Kureto says that's true, so he needs to ask him a few questions to see if he's still useful. He then asks Gurren what the protagonist, Yoichi and Shiho, are, and how he managed to forge all three of them to be compatible with black demons. Gurren says it was just pure luck, but Kureto doesn't believe a word of it, since those compatible with black demons were part of experiments, and even then, the success rate is super low. But if he doesn't want to answer, it doesn't matter, as long as he keeps sharing his successful experiments with him. Gurren says he'll do it only if he feels like it, and asks if he can leave now. But Kureto asks why he's increased his pawns with black demon wielders. Gurren reassures him he's not planning a coup, because if he were, he'd kill him right now. Kureto is sure he couldn't, and then warns him not to get violent, as he's doing his job well. He then tells him that, just like him, he also knows his weaknesses, so he must get rid of love and friendship. As it starts to rain, Kureto tells Gurren he can trust him, as he never betrays his friends. Gurren asks what he's going to do now, maybe show him a new special prisoner. But Kureto just wants to see Gurren's vision for this world, because even though he has no hope for the world, he still keeps gathering strength and power. Gurren replies that it's because of the state of the world that he must gather power. But Kureto questions that if he has no ambition, he should just die, as people like that bring unnecessary sacrifices, being bad people. Kureto also tells Gurren he wants to rebuild the world by contacting other countries. Gurren asks if the first thing he'll do is rebuild the communications destroyed by vampires. But Kureto says the first thing is to cleanse the country of vampires and then crush the other survivor organizations to unite the world under the army's command. Gurren thinks this sounds like a little kid's dream and questions if he can achieve it. The lieutenant general says yes, since he knows the location of all 25 nobles. Gurren says the information he received could be a trap. Kureto replies maybe, but there's no time to hesitate. Gurren asks what the rush is. The lieutenant responds that in 1 month, headquarters will be attacked, so they can't let them make the first move. That's why he orders Gurren, his team, and 100 company soldiers to head to Nagoya, because 10 nobles are setting up a base there, and they must kill them and take control. Gurren questions that if he does that, they'll notice their movements. Kureto says, all the better. It will draw the vampires' attention. As they prepare for the final move, Gurren scoffs and questions him for treating him like a sacrificial pawn and for not telling him the whole truth of his plan. Finally, Kureto gives his orders, telling them to shut up and obey. If he does, he'll see a world with vampires as their slaves. But then, Mahiru manifests and tells Gurren she'll only follow his orders so he can make his wish come true. Now we see Shinoa approaching the protagonist, teasing him about whether he can see a girl changing from here. But this clown isn't amused and asks if he really tried to kill her. She tells him not to worry. She's still alive for a reason and says he should have protected her. But Shinoa cheers him up, telling him that he and Shiho are the vanguard of their squad, so they have to protect her when she wants to die. The protagonist stays serious and asks if he lost control because Gurren did something to him. Shinoa replies, that's probably true. Then our hero invites her to come with him when he has to kill vampires. In case he loses control, the girl accepts and tells him he has nothing to worry about. When they return to the rest of the guys, the protagonist tells them he'll support Gurren since they're all part of his family, and he can't forget Mika. He tells them he doesn't know what a family is, but they shouldn't betray people just because they failed. Gurren promised to rescue Mika, and that's why he's going to support him, but he knows he shouldn't involve them too. Shiho interrupts to offer his support, and all the kids conclude that they'll take care of the family. And now we cut to Mika, who's getting worse and worse from not drinking blood. He goes to Cruel to take her blood, and the young woman enjoys the moment. Mika regains his senses, apologizes for his behavior, and then asks for a larger supply of blood. Cruel agrees, but warns him he can't go on forever drinking only her blood. Before leaving, Mika asks if it was necessary to kill his whole family, including him, and why she let them live if they were a problem for her. He wants to know what she's planning. Cruel replies that she doesn't care, which infuriates Mika, as he believes she's using you for something. When Mika tries to attack, she easily stops him. Mika confesses he can't follow her or trust her anymore, so Cruel reveals the reason they're still alive and why they need the Seraph of the End. Finally, she tells him that in 1 month, the war to annihilate all humans will begin. She assigns him his secret mission. He must retrieve you, hidden from both vampires and humans. But if he fails, he'll be public enemy #1 for both sides. At night, Shinoa visits Guren, who is analyzing how to attack the vampires. She informs him that the kids have mastered demonic possession. She also answers his question about whether she's in love with you. Shinoa says she doesn't know yet, but it's the first time someone has trusted her, so she wants to return the feeling. Before she leaves, Guren gives her deployment orders. She must report to the relay station. At 6 the next day, the scene changes, and we see the vampires surprised that Mika has also been summoned to Nagoya. Next, Kuredo is supervising an experiment in a secret lab where they almost kill a woman. Then, the protagonist's squad heads to Nagoya City. Shiho demands more directions from Shinoa, who jokes they're going to chill in Hakone, but Mitsu tells them they need to go to the Ebina service area, and then to Nagoya. Our hero wonders if he'll find Mika in the city. Suddenly, a group of horsemen of the apocalypse spots them, so they have to fight. With a coordinated team attack, they easily get rid of their enemies, but afterwards, they prank this clown by pretending they're going to leave him to walk all the way to Ebina. In the next scene, we see Guren's squad. He's scolding Goshi for looking at magazines of girls in bikinis instead of working. Goshi informs Guren that Mito went into the building looking for vampires. Then Mito appears and reports no vampire presence inside. But Goshi is still on the bikini topic and tells Mito she should wear one because Guren wants to see her in a bikini. This makes Mito blush and get nervous, but after scolding Goshi, she asks if it's really in order. Guren just ignores her. Then we see a high-end car pull up, and General Shinya gets out, saying he found it abandoned. Guren tells him he's crazy but needs to know why he's here. Shinya replies that Kuredo told him about the suicide mission, since 1,000 men couldn't stand against the vampire nobles, and it's thanks to his craziness that he's come to help, so he expects Guren's thanks. In the next scene, the protagonist's group complains about being late, so Shiho suggests that if they get yelled at, they should blame Shinoa and Mitsu. But Mitsu protests, asking how they could rat out their own teammate. And our hero complains that comrades don't abandon their own. And now we see Guren, standing before the entire army, giving out orders. They are to move out at 7 a.m. to be in Nagoya by 1 p.m. As the protagonist's squad tries to sneak in unnoticed, Guren spots them anyway and chews them out for being late. Shinoa tries to make an excuse, but Guren shuts her down with a firm tone, reminding her this mission is no game. He orders that anyone who doesn't know military regulations should leave. Because of this, the whole army glares at the kids, seeing them as a nuisance. But at that moment, Yu takes full responsibility, saying he decided to fight the horsemen of the apocalypse. Guren tells him to go back, but this ugly boy begs him to let him help defeat vampires. Guren finally agrees, telling him to fall in line, but that they'll be punished later. Finally, Guren tells the entire army he won't tolerate anyone breaking the rules or thinking this is a joke. This mission is one of the most dangerous in history, where many will surely die. But now, they are all a family, so they're bound to lose many family members. But it's still worth fighting and completing the mission. Guren's speech totally fired up the army. Afterwards, Shinoa pulls the protagonist aside to apologize, saying their delay was her fault. Yu tells her not to worry. That's what family is for. However, our hero is then summoned to speak with Guren. The whole group offers to take part of the blame, but the protagonist won't let them and goes alone. When he gets to Guren, Guren asks how he's doing, which surprises you since that's not what you ask someone you're about to scold. Guren says he knows it wasn't his fault and that he likes that he lies to protect his friends. Then Shinya steps in to greet the protagonist, which really surprises him. But Guren cuts the chatter short, ordering Goshi to use his power. From outside, the kids hear a scream and run to save the protagonist. When they arrive, they find out it was just one of Goshi's illusions, which infuriates Shinoa. But Guren tells her it's part of her punishment for letting the protagonist come alone. He's going to teach her what it feels like to lose someone dear. He continues to scold her, saying her jokes could get her family, her teammates, killed. He asks if she could save him if he seemed like an overwhelming threat right now. Guren proposes a test, a showdown between Mito and Shinya against Shinoa's entire squad. Shinoa then gives her squad instructions on how to win. Yoichi will handle General Haragi. She and Mitsu will fight Mito, and the protagonist and Shiho will take on Guren. But she warns them that if the protagonist and Shiho fail, they're all dead. Guren gives the signal to start, ordering Shinya to attack first. His attack wreaks havoc on Shinoa's squad's formation, so now they decide to strike back. Shinoa orders them to create a distraction, so Mitsu lays down continuous fire. Shinya tries a long-range attack that Yoichi stops. Then he goes for Guren, but our hero and Shiho block him. Meanwhile, Shinoa and Mitsu do their job, attacking Mito, but Guren launches an attack that sends them flying outside. The battle continues there between the protagonist and Guren, surprising everyone watching the protagonist's punishment. Guren uses an explosive spell on our hero. Shinoa tries to help, but Mito stops her. Guren then threatens the protagonist to either surrender or he'll blow his head off. Yu decides to attack at close range, so Guren will also take heavy damage. But Guren isn't surprised and was expecting it. This clown gets distracted by a shot from Shinya, letting his guard down. Guren tells him that if this were real, all his teammates would have died in a few moves. Guren defeats them all and mocks them, saying there are 3 with Black Demon gear, and they couldn't do a thing. Guren scolds them and tells the whole army they now have rookies they need to look after. The army takes it well, but says they need to work more on their teamwork. Later, Guren asks the protagonist if he's satisfied. Yu says yes, and that he was just thinking of a strategy to beat him next time. Guren approaches him and kindly says they need to get stronger as a team. Suddenly, a soldier named Narumi objects to taking rookies who can't fight as a team and break the rules. Guren completely agrees that they might be a burden. For that very reason, he'll be in charge of looking after them. He orders Shigur to change the records to merge Shinoa's squad with Makoto Narumi's. Clearly, Narumi just got a taste of his own medicine. As Guren leaves, Narumi looks ticked off. The protagonist tries to greet him, but Makoto is rude. Shiho then says that what he said about them might be unpleasant, but it's the truth. Shinoa decides to apologize to everyone, saying their defeat was due to her lack of talent and that she feels like a terrible officer. Our hero stops her and reminds her of Guren's words. They need to get stronger as a team, so all the kids support her as their commanding officer, which instantly cheers Shinoa up. Next, we see Mika hearing screams of people fleeing from vampires. When he finds them, he sees a vampire feeding, which awakens his own bloodlust. He watches as children are transported to the Nagoya nobles. His vampire companion recommends he drink some blood now before they leave, but he continues to refuse and walks away to a hidden spot to drink Cruel's blood. When that doesn't work, Mika remembers her words and then hears a scream for help. Seeing a little girl's neck, he tries to drink her blood, but stops himself just in time. The next day, Shinoa's squad is waiting patiently, while the protagonist asks how much longer they have to wait. Narumi orders them to gather so they can review the strategy one last time. The plan is that 1400, the Moon Demon Company will attack the vampire nobles in Nagoya. Their specific mission is to assassinate the 15th progenitor, Lukal Wesker. If their first attack fails, They must prevent his retreat to stop him from calling for help from other nobles. They have to hold him until the lieutenant colonel's squad defeats their target and comes for them. There are 10 nobles in Nagoya, 8 of whom will be assassinated simultaneously at 14:15. For each noble, there are 3 Moon Demon Company teams, but if the attacks fail, the nobles could regroup due to the short distance, and that would be the end for everyone. That's why Narumi tells the kids there are high expectations for them, and they can't fail, as the mission wouldn't work with only 2 teams per noble. The protagonist leaves the meeting, joking about who he has to kill, which gets him an instant scolding from Narumi. Narumi's squad says their sergeant doesn't trust leaving their backs to a bunch of kids. The others tell this clown to apologize since he's causing friction, but Shinoa steps up and apologizes on his behalf to Sergeant Narumi. Narumi says he doesn't need an apology, just for them to be focused, as he doesn't want to lose comrades because of someone who puts everyone's lives at risk. The protagonist steps up and says they feel the same way. No one wants to lose comrades. That's why he's apologizing, even if it's not necessary, because he doesn't want his teammate or Narumi's to die. Narumi scolds him, saying he should at least remember his target's name. But Yu says there's no point in remembering someone he's going to kill, but he will remember the names of those he has to protect. Shinoa intervenes, apologizing again and promising that even though they're rookies, they'll give it their all, not to drag anyone down. Narumi then asks Yoichi where their target is. Yoichi replies that he'll be arriving shortly, as he always comes to the park at the same time. Narumi reassures everyone not to worry, as they have the element of surprise. Next, we see a very nervous Yoichi, but Shinya calms him down, telling him not to miss. He says they're the sniper team, and that Gurren asked him to train him, knowing it's his first mission as a sniper. If they fail, there's still the combat team to handle it. So, the most important quality for a sniper is to stay calm. These teams must remain composed to kill enemies and support all their comrades. They must also kill anyone who might be captured or tortured if left behind. Shinya confirms that even if they are comrades, they must do it, which rattles Yoichi. Finally, he advises him not to get nervous, and he'll be fine, giving him breathing instructions. Yoichi manages to calm down and gets into position. Shinya then indicates that their target, Lukal, has arrived. Yoichi spots him but is told not to fire before the mission starts. Now, Lukal Wesker is enjoying a glass of blood from a little girl while sitting in the park. Lukal offers his servant a taste, but he declines, saying he's had enough energy for the day. But Lukal insists he try the AAA quality blood, so he agrees, but says he'll do it in a bit. Lukal then asks his opinion on Cruel's letter ordering an attack on all humans. Lukal isn't comfortable taking orders from her, so his servant says he doesn't have to follow them, as they belong to a different faction and can wait for new orders from the Progenitor Council. However, he mentions that it seems Cruel herself is coming to Nagoya. Hearing this, the noble thinks maybe he should follow the orders after all, even if they work for Cruel's rival political faction and might face sanctions for completing the mission. But Lukal detects an incoming attack and uses a servant as a shield. The mission begins, and the combined squad moves in to fight Lukal, who invokes his power by feeding his sword his blood. He then attacks the snipers directly. When Yoichi sees this, he wants to run, but Shinya orders him to kill as many normal vampires as he can first. Meanwhile, the protagonist asks for permission to go ahead and scout the enemy's strength, and Narumi immediately allows it. Our hero gets in front of Lukal and attacks him directly, buying the group time to come up with a new strategy. But Lukal is too smart and repels all their attacks. However, Shiho manages to distract him so the others can pierce him with their demonic weapons, and Shuzaku summons a demon to try and capture him. As they succeed, the protagonist and Narumi launch their attack, but Lukal frees himself by cutting off his own arm. Narumi orders him to maintain formation and defeat the enemy. Lukal says he now understands what Cruel meant, that they are very, very dangerous humans. Narumi proposes they all attack together while maintaining formation, but Shinoa says that's impossible while he's chasing them. She suggests luring him into their formation. She starts provoking the vampire, enraging him and causing him to attack them directly, lowering his guard. This allows our hero to launch a surprise attack and defeat him. Before being captured, Lucal decides to kill himself, shocking everyone present. After completing their mission, everyone is thrilled, but Yoichi wonders if the other squads are okay. We then cut to Guren's battle. He's tired and badly wounded, but managed to defeat the noble vampire. Goshi comes over and scolds him, telling him to stop trying to look cool. After having a rough time, the rest of his comrades complain they almost died. Guren tells them it was all part of the plan, and that if he were to die, Shinya would take command. Suddenly, a badly wounded Kusunoki arrives, reporting that the city's 45-man team was defeated. The vampires are demanding the lieutenant colonel come to the city, as 19 were killed, and the rest are hostages. Before dying, Kusunoki says it was an honor to fight alongside Guren. Afterwards, Mito recommends not going to the city, as it's a trap, but asks if he doesn't care because they're going anyway. Guren orders them to rendezvous with Narumi's and Shinoa's squads to assassinate Crowley Usford. Meanwhile, Crowley is chilling in his building, accompanied by 2 vampires. One, named Chess, is quenching her thirst by killing a hostage, and the other, Horn, scolds her. But Crowley tells them not to worry, as they have plenty more. So, the noble Chess invites Horn for a drink, but she refuses and advises her to learn some self-control. Horn asks Crowley what he thinks about the human attack that started the war in Nagoya. Crowley isn't concerned. He gets up, grabs the dead hostage from behind, and orders Chess to come to him. The noble then hits her, sending her flying into a wall. Crowley says he did it to see which weapon is stronger, a human's or a vampire's, since humans seem to be gaining strength rapidly thanks to their demon-cursed, vampire-slaying weapons. He thinks someone is leaking information about them, and it's probably a high-ranking traitor. He then shows them that if they're wounded by these weapons, they'll never heal, so they must be careful. Horn offers to heal him, but he says she can drink his blood now if she wants. The girls start arguing over who goes first. We see them holding the hostages outside the building as Horn savors Crowley's blood. She asks if something is wrong, but he says he's just thinking about who's pulling the strings of this war, Krull or Farid, as he doesn't believe it's a human. And now, we cut to Narumi's and Shinoa's squad, waiting at the fort for another squad to join them. Shinoa informs them they have until 2:20 p.m. A little before that, Aihara's squad approaches, asking for Guren. Narumi tells her they haven't heard anything from them yet, so she orders her men to wait until 2:20. We then see Shiho worried about the number of men in the allied squad, as there should be 15. Shinoa replies that they might have died in battle. Narumi approaches Aihara to ask if they completed their mission. She says yes, otherwise they wouldn't be back, and is surprised to see Narumi's team has no casualties. He jokes it's thanks to their great squad leader. The girl tells him not to joke, but he praises leader Shinoa, which makes her very nervous, and Aihara gives her a strange look. The protagonist notices the situation and tells Aihara her squad can rest, as they have everything covered. Aihara asks Narumi if that's the rookie, and Narumi says yes, but he can't remember his name. This makes Yu mad at him, but Narumi says he was just kidding. Finally, Aihara accepts this clown's offer to rest. The protagonist returns to his squad and tells the group they really did lose comrades, which instantly saddens everyone. But Shinoa tells them they have to make this day count and return safely. They then see Guren arrive, a bit wounded, but he immediately starts scolding them for lazing around in the sun. Guren asks if they completed their mission and is happy to hear the protagonist's answer. Guren says, for them, it was a piece of cake. The lieutenant colonel asks Narumi if the rookies did their job, or if they slowed them down. Narumi replies they did their job very well, and our hero teases him for it, so Narumi gives him a corrective smack. Guren now looks at Aihara and asks if she lost 8 men. The young woman sadly says yes, feeling a lot of anger, and apologizes to him for losing so many men. Guren replies that he knew what could happen, and that all responsibility lies with him, and he's glad to see her return. And now the lieutenant colonel asks Narumi about the other squads, but hearing they haven't arrived, he orders that they can't wait any longer and must begin the next mission. Guren tells them the 9 squads assigned to the city's 3 nobles were completely wiped out, with 25 men taken hostage, so now they must assassinate the nobles and rescue their comrades. Aihara asks to go with them, but Guren says he needs her to stay and inform the other squads when they arrive. After rescuing their comrades, they'll return to the airport. And now we see Guren leading his small army. Shinya approaches him to warn that if they lose this battle, they won't be able to complete the remaining missions. But that doesn't bother him. He's only worried about his comrades' deaths. Aihara, watching the clock, gets nervous as no one has arrived yet, but a soldier comes to calm her down. Just then, a new squad arrives, but they suddenly see vampires and try to flee. She gives them the new orders and then attacks the helicopter full of vampires, causing many of them to attack. Mika appears in action and is tasked with attacking Aihara. When he restrains her, he wants to ask a question, but she activates Code 284, which means everyone must commit suicide. However, Mika reacts first and stops her from executing it. He tells her to pretend to be dead and promises to let her go if she just answers his question. Mika wants to know about the protagonist. Aihara says she'd rather die than betray a comrade, but this infuriates Mika, who tells her they're not her comrades. Lacus asks Mika what he's doing, and he says the human he caught also killed herself. The vampire mocks them, calling them stupid, but Renee finds a trail of murdered comrades. Renee finds Lucal Wesker's attire, which surprises the others, as it's impossible for humans to kill nobles. Then, a vampire appears, reporting that many more vampires have been killed, including Mel Stefano. Renee suggests advancing to Crowley's location in the city, but hearing this, Aihara gets up and takes Mika hostage. The other vampires don't seem to care about Mika, and he tells her he'll be the one to deal with her. But Aihara takes the chance to say that the protagonist is heading to the city. Mika is surprised and asks why she trusted him. She says it's because he called you his rookie. The girl tries to attack Mika, but he stops her with one move and asks if she really wants to live. He then hits her to interrogate her about the other human's location, promising not to kill them if she talks. Aihara gives a fake location, sending them to the botanical garden, and is then knocked out by Mika. The vampires are alarmed that the humans know the location and names of their nobles, so Renee orders them to head there to provide support. Before leaving, Aihara begs Mika to kill her, but he refuses, telling her to do it herself. Mika planned to leave the girl, but Renee orders him to take her with them to extract information. Aihara gets up to attack them, managing to get Mika to deliver a fatal blow. Before heading to the botanical garden, Mika asks for 5 soldiers to accompany him to investigate the city as a precaution. And so, Mika sets off to find our hero. Meanwhile, Guren and the others are stalking Crowley. Guren watches City Hall and sees all the soldiers held hostage. He tells his team it's definitely an ambush, so they ask what to do. Yu, without hesitation, says they have to rescue the prisoners, that it doesn't matter if they're walking into a trap. But Guren suggests observing the enemy's movements and planning a solid strategy. The targets to defeat are 3: Crowley, Chess, and Horn. If they find out their enemies are too strong, he orders them to abandon their comrades. This enrages our hero, who believes no one should be left behind, but Shinoa calms him down and asks Guren what the mission's priority is. Guren says they must try to keep everyone in the group alive, then free and rescue the prisoners. Narumi asks if there will be another mission after this one, and Guren immediately says yes. They have to hold off the Nagoya vampires for as long as possible so that Shibuya headquarters can mobilize. That was the mission assigned. Narumi is surprised that headquarters will also be involved in this battle. Guren indicates that if everything goes well, they should head to Shinjuku shortly, revealing this mission is only the first phase. Shinya interrupts, saying they must wait for the enemy's moves. If they're attacked, they retreat. But if they find a gap in their defenses, they must seize the opportunity to rescue the prisoners. And, best case scenario, kill the nobles. But Shinya doesn't think that's possible. He then takes Yoichi to be his partner, and Narumi orders the rest to take positions for a counterattack. Shinoa does the same with her squad. We see Shinya pointing out targets to Yoichi. While he's doing so, Yoichi spots a noble and requests permission to fire. Guren immediately grants it. However, Crowley easily stops the attack, which Shinya finds strange. This also surprises the Lieutenant General, who says he didn't believe the stories about Crowley's strength were true. Yoichi tells the protagonist it's the same noble they fought before, which infuriates you, and he wants to see him. Crowley tells Chess and Horn it looks like they have visitors. Guren asks for possible solutions. Shinya thinks the best option is to kill the hostages before they're interrogated and flee, or they could split the enemy forces to create an opening to rescue the prisoners and evacuate quickly. But he clarifies they need to decide which option will yield more survivors. Yu tells Guren he shouldn't abandon his comrades, but Narumi suggests leaving them. This clown attacks Narumi, but he shoves him off, saying he has comrades among the prisoners too. But that's no reason to pout and start a scene. Shinoa suggests something that Guren finishes, saying they must first put on a flashy fight, so the nobles think they're the main force. Shinya says he doesn't mind, but it's tough with the opponent they have. Guren tells him they just need to win until they escape, then assigns everyone their positions. Meanwhile, the noble ladies are getting impatient, but Crowley says that's what their enemy wants, so they must wait. Humans are dumb at mid to long-term planning, but great in the short term. So if they're not attacking, they might have a different objective than just defeating a few of them. He then orders the nobles that Farid will want to know a lot, so they must capture one of the attackers to make them talk. The girls agree they don't like Farid, as you never know what he's thinking. Crowley says that's totally true, but it's always fun to be around him. So his plan is to capture the officers who seem to know something. And finally, Chess and Horn agree. Meanwhile, Guren indicates that his squad, along with Shinya, will attack Crowley, while Shinoa's and Narumi's squads rescue the prisoners. But our hero questions Guren if they can take on the noble alone. Guren says they'll manage to fight and run, so they only have 5 minutes for the rescue. Afterwards, they must retreat to Nagoya Airport to regroup with the rest of the team. Shinoa asks what the orders are after they retreat, and Guren says the orders are waiting at the airport. Guren then approaches Shinya to ask about the enemy. He replies they haven't moved. They seem to be waiting. Guren suggests using Goshi's illusions to make them think they're being attacked by 200 men. But Goshi says that's impossible unless they get closer to the enemy, so Guren orders him to do just that. Now Narumi suggests to Shinoa that their squads go together, but she refuses, saying they won't be able to take advantage of the 5 minutes that way, so they must go separately. But before they leave, both squads promise not to die. Guren kicks off the mission for his squad. Shinoa tells them to sync their watches to hers, and when the time is up, everyone must retreat, especially Yu, telling him it's an order from the team leader. But before starting, everyone feels motivated to complete their mission. Then an explosion is heard, signaling the start of their operation. Guren's squad approaches, taking down many vampires while the hostages beg them to flee. Goshi reaches the optimal distance to cast his illusion, which works well, stopping several vampires. Then Narumi's squad rescues Kato's squad. Shinoa's team does the same. Guren approaches to face Crowley, who clearly recognizes him from their previous battle. The battle begins with Guren on the offensive, but the noble easily repels his attacks. Shinya thought he had him in checkmate, but the vampire managed to escape. Mito tries to rescue Guren, but Goshi stops her, saying she'd just be in the way. Meanwhile, Narumi's and Shinoa's squads debate whether to help Guren or continue rescuing hostages. Shinoa agrees to help Guren, but they only have about 3 minutes, and everyone must follow her orders. Shinya and Guren are exhausted, thinking this might be the time they actually die. But Guren says at least they completed the mission by drawing their attention. They're interrupted by the nobles, who start a new fight. Crowley takes the fight lightly, mocking the humans for being so predictable, though they manage to escape him. Guren and Shinya try to flee, but Shinya has a pretty deep wound. Crowley gets angry that they're running and chases them through City Hall, managing to wound Guren, who orders Shinya to escape and take command. Crowley advises the same before he changes his mind, but suddenly our hero attacks the noble from the ground. This ugly boy tries a surprise attack, but Crowley skillfully stops him, only to find himself surrounded by attacks from Shinoa's squad. When the protagonist tries to attack directly, the vampire uses Guren as a shield. So Yu decides to invoke Asuramaru, and when he attacks using his manifestation power, Chess and Horn protect the noble. The protagonist gets furious, and decides to attack them too, but they easily back him into a corner. When Horn was about to hurt our hero, Shinoa appeared to protect him. She orders them to fall back and regroup. Mitsu uses her power to create a shield so they can escape, though the protagonist is determined to go back and help Gurren. However, Gurren orders them to escape. Crowley recognizes the protagonist, and the noble ladies ask if they can finish them off. But Crowley says no, as Farid might want to interrogate them first. The protagonist orders his teammates to cover him as he goes to rescue Gurren, but Shinya stops him, ordering him to abandon Gurren. Yu refuses to accept the order and tries to escape, but Yoichi and Shiho hold him back by force. While the vampires deliberate on what to do with them, Shinya sees Gurren, who tells him something secret. Because of this, Shinya makes the decision to flee, even if it's by force. Chess and Horn want to pursue them, but suddenly an illusion traps them, leaving Crowley amazed by human power. He sets out to find who's casting it, but is attacked by Gurren's entire squad, who have come to save him. However, the Lieutenant General orders them to leave, though they all refuse to flee without him. He then orders Goshi to get everyone out of there so they can escape while he's being beaten by the vampire. But Crowley uses his strength to shatter the illusion in one move. Still, they all manage to escape. Finally, he approaches Gurren to mock him for being abandoned, and orders the vampire girls to lock him up until Farid arrives. Next, we see Kureto overseeing the army's movement, demanding they hurry up. He then approaches his brother Shinya, claiming he's there to supervise on their father's orders. He also informs him that the vampire nobles are going to attack Kanto, but Kureto isn't worried, because if his mission fails, all of humanity is lost. Shinya gets angry at his attitude and grabs him by the collar, but Kureto threatens to kill him if he does it again. Shinya accuses him of treason and orders his arrest, but when he turns, he sees the guards are dead. Shinya says he won't let him get away with it, but Kureto says he will, because he's going to save the world. He's then informed that the entire army can move out in 30 minutes. Ignoring his brother, he says he's going to contain the vampires in Nagoya. His brother questions his decision, arguing that the troops they sent weren't for that purpose. He tells him if he thinks he can stand up to their father, he's insane and clearly won't make it out alive. Kureto threatens him with his sword and tells him he should be grateful, because his obedience still makes him useful. He then leaves, telling him to hide until he returns. If he gains power, he'll give him a job. And now we cut to Shinya, who's dragging the protagonist away by force while this loser complains about abandoning Gurren. Shinya orders Shinoa to calm him down since he's part of her squad. She reminds him of the promise he made. They had to leave no matter what. She tells him Shinya has been Gurren's friend for much longer than he has. Shinya reminds Yu of Gurren's words, that they must return victorious to protect everyone. Then Gurren's squad joins Shinya. They're also very sad about the situation, but Mito asks the general to continue the mission. The general orders them to first regroup with Narumi, but the protagonist interrupts them. Yu, very sadly, questions why they have to abandon their family for the mission, saying if they do that, he doesn't care about living anymore. As he tries to stand, he reminds everyone that Gurren is his family. He then remembers how Gurren helped him as a child when he had nightmares about his family's murder, and how he treated him when he felt he couldn't have a family because he always loses them, so he didn't want to live. Gurren asked him if it hurt to be alive, and the protagonist said yes. The Lieutenant General says he understands that feeling as he went through something similar, but he still has many things to live for until someone needs him. He advises the protagonist to think the same way and to just kill vampires until he finds his reason to live. In the present, this clown apologizes to everyone, but says he's going back to save Gurren. That teamwork isn't his thing. As he takes 2 special pills, he says if he can't save his family, he'd rather die. His squad gets worried because he'd already taken 2 pills, so he could die now. He says he's fine, but then starts vomiting blood. Shinya freaks out and says they all need to go to Narumi's team together, and Shinoa's squad will handle this. But when they try to make him vomit, the demon takes control of the protagonist's body, damaging him in the process and killing him. At the city hall gates, Mika arrives just as the other vampires detect Crowley has been attacked. The vampires want to help Crowley, but Mika doesn't want to see him now. They challenge him, and they all end up dead. Meanwhile, Mika begins his search for the protagonist, who is still half dead in the middle of his comrades. Now, Kureto is supervising the assembly of troops ready for transport, worried about the test subject's condition. They report he's somewhat unstable and suffering, so Kureto orders them to up the dosage and control him, even by force. He also asks how things are going in Nagoya, and they tell him Guren reported everything is going great. We cut back to our hero, face to face with Asuramaru, who scolds him for not giving up on revenge. The protagonist, with immense pain in his chest, can only manage to say he needs the power to save Guren. Asuramaru says if he wants power, she can give him all he wants, since she feeds on his greed. The problem is, he keeps taking those pills that mess with the curse and suppress his greed, so it's not possible. He can't get power without consequences thanks to the drugs. The protagonist then asks what he needs to do to get more power, and Asuramaru tells him it's too late. He died instantly when his organs exploded from the drugs. Even his heart was destroyed, so her regeneration powers can't do a thing. Yu is completely stunned to hear this, wondering if he's in another world now, but the demon tells him that would have been better. He's dead without being fully dead, as the evil angels are keeping him alive by force. The protagonist turns and sees a kind of trumpet. Yu goes to touch it, but the demon advises against it, saying angels are worse than demons. Then a heartbeat is heard, and Asuramaru offers to heal him. However, he heads for the horn, but she manages to stop him, telling him she's already given him the power equivalent to 3 of those pills for about 3 minutes. Yu wakes up to see all his worried teammates around him. He tells them he's back but has to leave quickly. He reaches City Hall, where everything looks distorted. The nobles are torturing Guren, asking how they get so much power. He replies that a goddess gave it to him. Then they see the protagonist enter, who, with all his strength, tries to attack the nobles. But even using his maximum power, Crowley stops him easily. When he's about to kill him, Guren steps in the way, ordering him to leave. Yu gets frustrated by his lack of power, and the noble tells him it's because he's livestock. This just infuriates our hero, who attacks again, though Crowley is still more powerful. Guren tells him to stop, as the demon will take over his body. The protagonist tells him to shut up, that he came to save him and won't give up so easily. Yu attacks again, but gets nowhere, so he orders Asuramaru to give him more power. Crowley complains that if this keeps up, he'll end up actually killing him. Asuramaru agrees to give him power as long as the protagonist feeds more greed into his body, causing him to turn into a demon. Then the countdown to enter the demon coffin, Kisekio, begins. The nobles don't understand what's happening. At that moment, Shiho arrives, but the protagonist tells him not to get in the way. Seeing the protagonist turned into a demon scares Shiho, so he traps him in the coffin and takes him away. Finally, our hero is captured and unconscious, allowing his comrade to escape with him. As they run to the exit, Shinya tells them to hurry, as vampire reinforcements have arrived. Narumi then tells them where to go to meet the rest of the rescued soldiers. Now Mika sees the helicopters with reinforcements arriving, and a heavy snow begins to fall. More nobles are on the helicopters, including Queen Krull and Farid. Mika sees the human army approaching. Shinoa's squad, along with Shinya, thinks they can take them. Shinoa suggests that since it's just one, they should defeat him while protecting the protagonist. But Mika, seeing Yu, says the humans are going to give him back, with an intimidating glare. Mika remembers when they were kids, and he asks the protagonist what he dreamed of doing the day they escaped the vampire capital, and how fun it would have been for the whole family to be together outside the prison, in a world without vampires. In the present, Mika prepares to face the entire human army to get the protagonist back. Mika easily breaks through the first enemy line, but then runs into Goshi's illusions. He breaks free relatively easily, but takes a few hits as they move in to kill him. At that moment, he sees the protagonist on Shiho's sword and shoots off to retrieve him. When Shinoa's squad prepares to attack, she stops them, as the approaching vampire is the protagonist's family. Mika tries with all his might to break through the enemy defenses, even at the cost of taking heavy damage. He finally reaches the protagonist, but Mitsu and Shinoa try to stop him. Shinoa tries to reason with him, but Mika is still focused on his goal of getting Yu back. Shiho tries to stop him, but gets hit on the head, causing the protagonist to fall. Mika manages to catch Yu in his arms and is overjoyed, but Yoichi stops him by the sword, begging him not to go. Mika tells him if he's going to kill him, do it already, and if not, stop bothering him. However, Yoichi replies that if he's the protagonist's family, then he's part of their family too. Mika hesitates for a second, but attacks Yoichi anyway. Losing focus, Shinya manages to pierce him with his weapon, but just as he's about to kill him, Shinoa stops him and protects Mika, telling him that if he were to die, Yu would be furious with them. So she tells him to take him and leave. The rest of the army, including Shinya, doesn't understand what Shinoa is doing and wants to kill Mika. But Shinoa's entire squad forms up to protect the protagonist and Mika, facing their own comrades. Mika is surprised to hear their words and can't believe this exists in this world. Meanwhile, he remembers the protagonist and his family as kids, when they wanted him to play with them. Shinoa approaches and tells him they have to run now, and that they'll meet up at the airport soon, so they should trust her. Mika manages to escape with the protagonist, but a soldier attacks from behind. Shinoa tries to kill her, but Shinya orders them not to, yet she attacks anyway. However, Narumi saves him just in time, scolding the soldier. He then demands an explanation, but Shinya yells, "There's no time for that," as enemy reinforcements have arrived. The vampires that arrived easily defeat the soldiers, including Narumi's comrades, who goes berserk. But Shinya stops him, as there's no time to fight. They just have to run. Though it's too late, all the reinforcements have arrived. On the other side, Mika flees with the protagonist with what little energy he has left. General Shinya orders everyone to head to the airport rendezvous point, doing whatever it takes to get there. Meanwhile, a badly wounded Mika collapses and tries to heal using Kroll's blood, but he's out of doses. He wants to tell the protagonist something, so he tries to wake him up, but fails. As he's crying in frustration, he hears a noise. It's a child who starts to run when he sees he's a vampire. The child enters an abandoned supermarket, and we see he's not alone. There's a whole group he asks for help. Mika holds him by the neck, debating whether or not to drink the kid's blood, but stops when the boy calls him a monster. He then carries the protagonist inside the supermarket to safety. Now, Yu is with Asuramaru, who tells him right and wrong don't matter when he's determined to protect his family. She also mentions he's been unconscious for a while. The protagonist worries and asks what happened to Guren. She scolds him for always worrying about others, and says she has no idea what happened since she can only see what he sees. But he insists on asking about Guren, and she tells him it seems another family member is with him right now. The protagonist wakes up not knowing where he is, and then sees a wounded vampire. He draws his sword to fight, but then realizes it's Mika and approaches him. Seeing him, Mika gets up and lunges at the protagonist, begging to drink his blood. The protagonist asks what's wrong, but Mika just says he's in pain and needs to drink a lot of blood. But just as Mika is about to bite, the protagonist hugs him, apologizing for leaving him alone. Mika regains his senses and apologizes to the protagonist, who asks if not drinking blood makes him feel this bad. The young man says yes, and then starts coughing up blood. The protagonist offers to let him drink his blood, but Mika refuses, telling him not to come closer as he just wants to tell him something. But Yu refuses, seeing Mika is dying, and shows him his neck so he can drink. Mika begs him to stop, saying he can't resist anymore. Still, the protagonist grabs his head, pulls him closer, and says he couldn't bear to watch him die again, now that they're finally reunited. But Mika refuses, saying he'll become a full vampire and never age. The protagonist pleads with him to do him a favor and drink, but Mika keeps refusing, saying he spent so long trying not to be a monster until he could see the protagonist again. Our hero scolds him, saying of course he doesn't want him to become a monster, but he'd rather he be a monster than die, because if he does, he'll cry. So he orders him to become a vampire to survive. Mika refuses, which starts a whole argument. The protagonist tells him if he wants to die, he should do it quietly and in secret, not make a big fuss about it. He refuses to listen until he agrees to drink his blood. Mika calls him a horrible person and says he'll become a monster because of him. The protagonist says it doesn't matter, they'll still be family. Mika starts drinking Yu's blood. The protagonist hugs him and welcomes him back. After finishing, Mika finally becomes a full vampire. Mika feels weird about having to drink his family's blood to survive. The protagonist tells him they're not normal and he shouldn't worry about a thing. Yu quotes Gurren, saying even if your only reason to live is revenge, you have to keep living because someday someone will need your help. He says that even though he thought nobody needed him, he forced himself to live on like an idiot. And he's grateful he did because he got to see him again. He encourages him, saying they'll survive together, no matter how hard it gets. Mika listens, crying his eyes out. The protagonist promises he'll find a way to turn him back into a human someday, so he asks him not to give up, to keep living. Mika replies that he was supposed to be the one to save the protagonist, but now Yu has gotten stronger and stopped being a crybaby. The protagonist gets mad and says he's the one crying. He then mentions that if he's stronger today, it's thanks to Gurren, but Mika tries to warn him that he's just being used. The protagonist says it doesn't matter, he's family, and besides, he was already dead before Gurren found him. So he's grateful to Gurren and Mika for keeping him alive, and he doesn't care if he's being used. Mika says he's not like the humans, he's not using him, but Yu jokes that he is, since he drank his blood. The protagonist says in return, he'll help him save his family. Now the boys start walking across the snowy ground, complaining about the time they spent apart. The protagonist asks Mika what happened to his teammates, but now Mika gets angry and tells him to stop talking about. So Yu just listens and ignores him, then says goodbye and heads off to find his friends. Mika gets furious and threatens him with his sword, justifying it by saying he's only doing it to protect. Yu tells him he should help him then, but Mika doesn't feel it's the right decision. The protagonist suggests he kill him, as he'd rather die than fail to save his family. Mika tries to convince him to give up, but the protagonist scolds him with such confidence that Mika lowers his sword. The young man then asks Yu if the girl from before and the others are the ones he considers his family. Yu is thrilled to know Mika knows what happened to his friends and demands he tell him. Mika reveals he was saved by the girl with the scythe and his friends. The protagonist is happy and says they're good people and they have to save them. But Mika replies that he'll only save those 4 friends of his. This makes the protagonist ecstatic, and he hugs him happily in thanks, asking them to go rescue them. Meanwhile, Shinoa's squad and the others have reached the airport, but can't find any of the rescue helicopters Gurren mentioned, worrying everyone. Now the protagonist is riding with Mika in a car. Mika tries to tell him what the humans did to him, and Yu says he already knew. But Mika reveals the protagonist is part of a huge experiment that makes him a prime target for both human and vampire organizations. Mika tells him that because of that failed experiment, the virus was released. The protagonist asks if it's his fault the world almost ended, but Mika says it's not his fault, they were just used, and the humans are to blame. He also tells him the orphanage they lived in was a lab, and now the Japanese army has resumed the experiments. Mika complains about humans because of their greed and total lack of control, but Yu tells him he's human and wants to turn Mika back into one. Mika says if the humans ever catch him, they could end the world, so he suggests they escape together, go somewhere far away where no one can find them. But Yu says there's nowhere to escape to, since everything was destroyed. Though, if that's what he wants, he first has to talk to his friend, as they could help him escape. Finally, we see Kureto heading to the test subject, discovering it's Shiho's sister. Meanwhile, at the airport, everyone is asking Shinya what to do since the vampires are chasing them. Then, Mito brings him the orders she found in the control room. Narumi asks Shinya what the letter says, and the general tells him they have orders to wait at the airport. Suddenly, we hear Rika Inoue hit Shinoa, questioning why she's still alive. Her teammates try to help, but Shinoa tells them not to. Rika scolds Shinoa for still being alive, saying it's her fault that Yoichi and so many others are dead. Shinoa apologizes to her, but Rika demands that if she wants to apologize, she should pay with her life. Narumi steps in and tells Rika he'll handle it while they take her sword. He says he's not asking for forgiveness and tries to threaten Shinoa with his sword, but Shinya says it's not their place to decide if she should be executed. This infuriates Narumi, who questions what they're even doing here. They followed the general, followed all his orders, but got nothing, and on top of that, the orders they received are to hold out at this airport. Narumi asks if they just came here to die. Shinya replies that the plan was to get on the escape helicopters to lure the vampires to Shinjuku, but that whole plan wasn't Guren's. It was Lieutenant General Kureto's. Narumi gets angry, saying he's tired of the Haragi family just using them while giving orders from on high. He then says he's quitting the mission, but the general scolds him, reminding him he'd said that orders from superiors are not to be disobeyed. Narumi complains, cornering him against the airport fence, and then says the Moon Demon Company only obeys Lieutenant General Ichinose's orders. So Shigure tells Sayuri she should leave too, as she's not obligated to follow a plan that isn't Guren's. But before everyone leaves, Shinya tells Narumi they're all quitting the mission together. He then says they won't follow the given orders. Now they must regroup their forces and will start a plan to rescue Lieutenant General Ichinose, which brings great joy to everyone. Next, we see Crowley arriving at the battle site where tons of humans died, and then he goes to listen to Cruel's speech. Meanwhile, a noble is trying to interrogate Guren, but is getting nowhere. Guren thinks he's tired of being beaten up, but he has to hold out so that when he does give them info, it's more believable. Now we see Farid with Crowley, who tells him 5 nobles died because someone leaked information. He asks Farid if he did it, and Farid immediately says no, but the answer doesn't satisfy Crowley, and he says it also annoys him that he sold out his location since he thought they were on the same side. Farid says it was for fun, and so no one would suspect him since his people were also attacked. The noble confesses he was behind it all, but wasn't working alone, as Guren was also a puppeteer. Guren continues to anger his interrogator, but after a heavy blow, the lieutenant general just gives them the name of a city, Shinjuku. Farid tells Crowley that Guren is an incomplete being on his way to becoming a full demon, which gives him 2 personalities throughout the day. One is an idealist who fights for his comrades and friends, and the other is a very negative one, possessed by his deceased lover who became a demon. Farid tells Crowley to watch as the monster is unleashed. Guren, possessed by his demon, breaks free, killing his interrogator and threatening the rest of the vampires. But Cruel intervenes and asks if he's an envoy from Mahiru Haragi, also asking about her whereabouts. Guren informs her that she's dead, but Cruel gets furious, as that wasn't the deal she made with Mahiru. If she's dead, she can't ally with him. Guren then tells her she should kill him, but taunts that she can't, because Cruel betrayed many of her own, and they couldn't back out of their deal. That's why they need the Seraph of the End experiment to succeed today. He confesses to Cruel that the experiment will take place at the airport. Cruel, therefore, orders her army to head to the airport. Meanwhile, at the airport, the Imperial Demon Army's planes are approaching. As they land, Shinoa's squad is surprised to see Kureto disembark. Kureto introduces himself to everyone and thanks them for their sacrifice in completing the mission. Thanks to them, they've achieved total victory over the vampires, so he orders them to rest. But no one can believe what they're hearing, and Shinoa orders her squad to maintain attack formation. Shinya approaches Kureto and questions the supposed victory, informing him that several nobles are approaching the airport. He asks how he plans to achieve victory, and demands Kureto tell them what's really happening. But Kureto ignores him and asks about Guren, calling him an idiot for getting captured. He asks Shinya which of his personalities he had when he was captured, which surprises the general, who asks what he's talking about. Kureto explains a little about it, but then tells him to shut up and leave. Kureto orders Aoi to proceed with the plan, so she signals the plane to continue. A large container is unloaded from the plane, and Shinya questions what it is. But Kureto reminds him he received orders that they no longer have a role in the plan. Shinya threatens him with his weapon, but Aoi stops him. Then, an angry Narumi tries to confront him. Meanwhile, Shinoa watches what's happening and thinks it looks really bad. Kureto tells Shinya to stop, as he won't be able to defend Narumi. Shinya asks that if the mission is truly over, he should forgive Narumi's attitude as thanks for the sacrifices they made. Kureto says he will, because he's in a good mood, and besides, he'll die anyway. The container then begins to open, and demonic blades shoot out, attacking everyone. Narumi manages to take cover with Shinya, but the rest of his comrades aren't so lucky. He watches as they die one by one and gets so enraged that he charges at Kureto, who tells him not to make such a fuss, as these are necessary deaths for humanity to advance. Just as Narumi is about to be killed, Shinoa's squad protects him. Then, Yoichi shoots at Kureto, but fails to harm him. Shinoa tells Kureto they're retreating, but he replies not to worry, since as a Haragi, she would survive. Still, Shinoa tries to flee, and Kureto attacks her too. But just then, the protagonist arrives to save her. Mika tells this ugly boy he shouldn't have come, as the humans are attacking each other. But Yu replies, it's a good thing they came. He then questions what Kureto is doing to his comrades. He's surprised to see Guren's black demon users, but attacks them anyway. Mitsu doesn't understand what kind of demon is inside the container, but they still manage to protect themselves from the attacks and try to escape. But just as they're about to, the vampires arrive with orders to annihilate all humans. Kureto orders his men to fight. The protagonist gets worried, but Shinya and Mika tell him it's the best thing that could have happened, as they can use it to escape. Goshi then tells them they're young and should flee, while the older ones cover their backs. The protagonist is determined not to let anyone die, so he rushes to the front lines. He then sees Guren and is overjoyed to see him there. But when he goes to give him a welcome hug, Guren, with his evil personality, tries to attack him. However, Mika stops him and says he knew they couldn't trust humans. And so, a fight between Guren and Mika begins. But the lieutenant general mocks Mika, saying he's not as strong as he was in Shinjuku, and easily defeats him. Suddenly, Kureto informs Guren that the plan has begun. The worried protagonist asks Guren what's happening to him, but he just calls him the Seraph of the End, and starts attacking everyone, managing to get more bodies to feed the demon inside the container. The container then explodes, revealing an angel emerging from within. But upon getting a good look, Shiho is shocked, as it's his little sister, Mirai. A completely possessed Mirai says that humans are disgusting and must disappear. She then sounds her trumpet, causing the entire battle scene to change. Farid and Crowley watch from a distance, and Farid says this is all fascinating. Kureto orders his people to control the angel. Shiho gets furious about what they're doing to his sister and goes to attack Kureto. But just then, Guren appears and runs him through with his sword. The protagonist gets enraged and starts attacking Guren. Mika immediately decides to help, and they both face off against Guren. When the opportunity to finish him arises, Yu hesitates, saying he can't do it. He asks why he's betraying his friends, why he's betraying his family. But Guren, while crying, runs him through with his sword and then starts laughing like a madman. Now we see Mirai, and a demon begins to emerge from within her. Kureto is delighted, knowing it's the demon of destruction summoned by the fifth trumpet named Abaddon, and that it has finally been controlled by humans. Controlling the Seraph of the End, Kureto orders Aoi to have Abaddon start devouring everyone. Abaddon unleashes many small monsters that begin to eat everyone, so Shinoa orders her comrades to leave, but Shiho doesn't want to abandon his sister. Badly wounded, he tells them to go, that this is his problem, but then collapses. Shinoa also sees Mika carrying the protagonist on his back while defeating enemies in his path. The protagonist wakes up and asks Mika about Guren, wanting to help him because he saw him crying. Mika refuses to save everyone, but the protagonist says they are his family. Then Mika is wounded by a monster, and the protagonist worries about him, offering his blood so he can heal. But Mika tells him he can't regenerate on this field, so nothing can be done, as no one can defeat this demon. Mika tells him he should leave now that he can walk, but Yu refuses to leave now that he's found him again, saying he won't abandon his family. He asks if he just has to defeat this monster to save everyone. Mika warns him again to flee, as there's no way to defeat it. But the protagonist stabs himself with his sword to reach Asuramaru, who tells him it's impossible to defeat the demon with his power, and that's why he's going to use the trumpet, calling him a traitor. Asuramaru warns him it's a terrible decision, as he'll lose his humanity. The protagonist replies he doesn't care anymore. He just wants to protect his family. When he sounds the trumpet, immense power envelops him, shocking everyone watching. This also makes the monsters stop attacking. Shiho begs the protagonist to have mercy on his sister. Meanwhile, Yu begins to transform. Kureto is stunned by what's happening, and Aoi informs him that a new, unknown seraph of the end has appeared, with the signal coming from the Pillar of Fire, but she has no idea what's going on. Kureto gets worried and says if they have to be enemies of God, so be it. It's the only way for humanity to advance. He orders an attack on the seraph on the battlefield. The attack begins, but they can't harm the protagonist, who creates a sea of salt that disintegrates everything it touches. Aoi warns Kureto that the seraph that appeared is the second trumpet, called the Salt King, but Kureto doesn't care and orders him killed. The fully possessed protagonist moves to attack. Kureto's demon desperately tries to push him back, landing many blows, but still, the protagonist, with great effort, manages to reach him and finally defeat him. Next, the Salt King tells everyone that humanity's end has come. They will all be turned into pillars of salt. Kureto decides to attack but can't harm him, so he orders all soldiers to capture him. Gurren approaches him and says it seems he's also gone completely crazy. The Salt King prepares to battle Gurren, but suddenly Asuramaru tells Yu that he relied on her again in the end, and apologizes for what she's about to do. She turns him into a demon, causing him to pass out. Now everyone, including Mika and Cruel, wants to get to the protagonist. Cruel orders Mika to retrieve him. In a surprise moment, Crowley attacks them, but Cruel manages to defeat him. Farit then attacks her from behind, successfully taking her down, but not before she gave Mika an order. Farit then presents Cruel as a traitor to the rest of the vampires, proclaiming himself the new leader. Narumi reaches the protagonist first and manages to buy time for Shinoa to get him away before Kureto arrives. A new clash between humans and vampires begins. Meanwhile, Shinya demands an explanation from Gurren, but he just says he's achieving what they dreamed of as kids, changing the world. Shinya realizes Gurren is possessed and tries to bring him back. Yoichi reminds Shinoa that before they escape, they have to rescue Shiho's sister. Suddenly, some soldiers arrive, demanding they hand over the protagonist. Shinoa says they're not part of the army, and they prepare to fight. But Mika appears, defeating them all with a single blow, and tells Shinoa to stop fighting and wasting time. We then jump 4 months later, where we see Kureto preparing his troops and the vampires welcoming a new noble named Lestkar. Meanwhile, our hero and all his friends are getting ready to rescue Shiho's sister and bring Gurren back. To do that, they must head to Sanguinem, the very place they barely escaped from. And that's how the anime ends. If you made it this far in the video, comment the secret word, which will be family. And remember, family is always the most important thing, just like this anime tells us. That way, I'll give you a heart, since you're one of the few people who makes it to this part of the video. Also, don't forget to hit that like button, smash the subscribe button, and ring that bell, which is super important. So with that said, remember you can comment on which anime you want me to summarize for the next video, as I always read them all. And with nothing more to say, Pina Colazat signs off.